Good evening. We're going to call the meeting of the Walker Planning Commission for December 6, 2023 to order. First item on the agenda is reviewing the meeting minutes for November 15, 2023. Unless there's any comments or corrections.
Make a motion to approve. Support.
Okay, motion by Scott, supported by Tyler to approve the minutes of November 15. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Next item on the agenda is general public comment. Now we've got 2 public hearings this evening, so there'll be time in each public hearing for people to share their thoughts and concerns. At this point, if there's something that's a non-agenda item that you want to take the opportunity to come to the podium and express your concerns or interest, please come forward. No takers. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Case number 23-027. This is a public hearing involving Johnson Park. And I turn it over to Planning Director Paula Preby to introduce the project.
Thank you, Chair. The project before us today, case 23-027 for Johnson Park, is a parking lot site plan review located at 4101 Butterworth. So this is a very large park, and we're looking at a smaller section of it. The request is for site plan approval for a plan to replace. Let me pull up the plans for you. To replace the existing 153 space parking lot at Johnson Park with an upgraded 200 space parking lot. The project will expand the parking lot, add bioswales and increase landscaping, replace existing paths. The applicant met with the staff site plan review committee in late October, was provided feedback on the site plan submittal. Almost all of the concerns have been addressed. It's a very solid plan. The one note that I have for the board is that the site plan does not show any lighting within the parking lot, and they state that the park is open from 7 a.m. to sunset. There's a street light at the entrance to the parking lot, but that no additional lighting is proposed. And I'll note that a similar case was approved for a different component of Johnson Park earlier this year, similarly with no lighting, as the park is only open until sunset. That's really all I have. It's a really solid, straightforward plan from a planning and zoning perspective, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Okay, thank you, Paula. Commissioners, any comments or questions? Okay, at this point, we'll turn to City Engineer Scott Connors for engineering perspective.
2 minor things from us. First off, there was a little bit of confusion about the site plan, whether we could determine what was proposed and what was existing. Usually if you see bold lines and, kind of like the picture in front of us where there's darker colors, it's considered to be proposed. And if it's lighter, it's existing. And so if this is truly all proposed as shown in dark gray, then we want to make sure we get some additional dimensions on the driveway and some of the issues related to the public right-of-way where we need to keep kind of close contact on those things. The second note we had is relating to the stormwater quality requirements. They will have to meet our stormwater ordinance for water quality, but they will not have to meet it for detention. Being right along the Grand River and right at the southern end of Grand Rapids, this is one of those sites we do not want to have the water slowed down and detained. We want to get it out of there, but it does have to be treated for water quality, so there will have to be some calculations for that, and those will have to be sealed by a professional engineer. And those are the only 2 comments we have.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Again, commissioners, any questions? Okay, at this point, we've got representative here from Kent County, the Parks Department, and the administration. If you could come forward and introduce the project from your perspective.
Great, thank you, Chair. My name is Ben Swayze. I'm the Kent County Parks Director. I've been in that position for all of about 6 months. Before that, I was actually the Township Manager in Cascade Township. But I just want to let you guys know how much I appreciate the opportunity to get in front of you and talk about a little bit about this exciting project. With me, I have Brian Mulligan, who's our landscape architect, who I think you've seen before on similar projects, and Mark Rambo, who is our deputy county administrator. So I'm going to talk briefly about how the project fits into a larger project that's going on with the Kent County Parks Department, and then Brian will be able to talk about this project specifically. So this project is part of a larger project that is the Kent County Grand River Greenway Trail. So this is an effort through our department to build 23 miles of new trail in Kent County. And essentially the section that we're responsible for, Kent County Parks, will start where the White Pine Trail intersects Rogue River Drive in Plainfield Township. And will meander through Plainfield Township, Cannon Township, Ada Township, Cascade Township, and Lowell Township. Besides adding 23 miles of new trail, we're looking to add some infrastructure projects throughout it as well, which I'll talk about a little bit. But it is an effort to complete a broader trail section of 76 miles that will extend essentially from Johnson Millennium Park in Walker all the way to the eastern border of Lowell Township, where it will connect to the Fred Meyer Grand River Valley Rail Trail. And then once that section is complete, it'll actually be part of a larger trail, 171 miles, that'll stretch from South Haven all the way to Owasso. So this is our conceptual plan. So if you're looking at it, the areas in green are completed trails, though I will note that there are some sections in the city of Grand Rapids proper along the waterfront where they're looking to complete sections as well. But the sections that we're trying to complete are in red, surrounded by yellow. So you can see where it intersects with the White Pine Trail in Plainfield Township and the proposed route that we're taking. So again, this route, this is developed preliminarily last year. We're in the process of developing our final trail routing right now, which will essentially follow this same path. Really, it is a decision to figure out the difference between the easiest to build, the best user experience, and the most efficient. So there's different areas we're looking at, but generally it's going to follow this path. And as I mentioned, besides the 23 miles of new trail, it entails some trailheads, bridges, tunnels, and interpretive stations as well. So these are the three big pieces of infrastructure that we're looking at. The first one is going to be a tunnel under Northland Drive at Rogue River. You can see the picture on here is from Walker. We're taking inspiration from the trail that you guys put under Lake Michigan. But we anticipate that to be the first large piece of infrastructure and anticipate working on that through 2024 through a 2025 construction period. The next two are pedestrian bridges. The first is a pedestrian bridge on Knapp Street over Grand River, which will connect a series of trails in Ada, Plainfield, and Grand Rapids Township to the greenway that we're developing on the other side of the Grand River. And then a park-to-park bridge between Roselle and Chief Hazy Cloud Park, which we really anticipate to be the brochure front piece of infrastructure for this project. If you've been down to the two riverfront parks in Lowell Township and the park-to-park bridge they put in there, we're certainly using that for inspiration as well. So this is the project at hand. The Greenway project actually entails two trailhead projects, one at Chief Hazy Cloud Park, which is kind of in the middle of the section of trail that we're attempting to build, and then our one here at Johnson Park. So we're estimating the project at Johnson Park will cost between $1.5 and $2.5 million. Includes a 50% increase in the available parking, additional biking infrastructure, potential four-season restroom renovation, and potentially an open shelter. This is funded through COUNTA ARPA funding. The parking expansion is engineered and bid, and that's what we're here to talk to you guys about today. And architectural services for our restroom renovation have been acquired as well. We're anticipating 2024 and 2025 construction for this project. This will also serve hopefully a new addition of Johnson Park mountain bike trails. So we've put together a plan to put about 6 miles of mountain bike trails in Johnson Park. The estimated cost for that project's between $250,000 and $350,000, and is a partnership between the Kent County Parks Department, the Kent County Community Action Department, and the West Michigan Mountain Bike Alliance as well. So this project is partially engineered, We ran into some issues with the State Historic Preservation Office due to some artifacts that could potentially be in the park. So we're working through how to get through that as well. We're also working through the funding, but we're estimating that that project can be done in 2024 and 2025 as well. So that's why we're here to talk to you today about this project, and I'll invite up Brian to talk a little bit more about specifically what we're asking for today.
Do you want to, Paul, go back to the plan? So I think Ben gave a pretty good summary of the whole project. So the main parking lot will expand. There are kind of three different entries. For one, the metal one's the trailhead for the future trailhead for the mountain bike parking, and then on the right-hand side of the plan, proposed shelter. We're thinking maybe like a warming shelter for the sledding hill when that's in activation and winter use. And then Scott had a couple comments on his engineering comments, and then I did put notes on the demolition and existing condition plan that the curbs are staying. Those are existing drives. We're only resurfacing or replacing the pavement. So I think that kind of addresses on in your item 2 on the engineering plan is, yeah, we'll address that with the stormwater and soil erosion permits. So that's all I have.
Commissioners, any comments, questions for the applicant? I've got one question. In terms of the traffic islands that you have portrayed in there, generally that would suggest that there's going to be concrete, but could you explain whether or not they're concrete or grass?
Those are bioswales to help meet stormwater quality improvements. With the new MS4 permitting, that's something we're adding to our projects. Like so Millennium Park is probably was on the forefront of doing that 20 years ago, having those bioswales. So that's what that is in there, in that project. So we are trying to do what we can with that park. It is a big bowl,
So in this case, the outline of those islands, is that going to be a raised curb and then grass within?
Sheep flow into it first.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Commissioners, if lacking any other comments? Looks like a good project. They've kind of shown how it's going to connect into the larger picture.
Exciting stuff. Glad to see our friends from Kent County here.
I think we should probably open the public hearing.
Very good point.
I make a motion to open the public hearing.
Support.
Motion by Tyler, supported by Scott to open the public hearing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Anyone in the audience that wants to offer any comments or questions concerning this project, this is an opportunity to do so. As you do come forward, either now or in the next hearing, you approach the podium, indicate your name and address, and then we would, I think, right here, we don't have anybody coming forward, but it'll be a 3-minute time period. We look for people to offer comments during throughout the meeting. See no.
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Support.
Motion by Tyler, supported by Scott to close the public hearing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Commissioners?
Motion.
Yes.
All right. For case number 23-027, based on the application material provided, I make a motion to approve the site plan to replace the existing 153 space parking lot at Johnson Park located at 4101 Butterworth Street Southwest with an upgraded 200 space parking lot and other site improvements for Kent County Parks Department in accordance with the plan set last revision dated 11/20/2023, subject to the following conditions and based on the finding of fact noted below. Conditions of zoning ordinance amendment approval, the applicant agrees to all conditions of approval as noted in the city engineer's report dated November 28th, 2023. The applicant shall provide 3 sealed sets of civil engineered plans incorporating the recommended conditions to the Community Development Department prior to the issuance of soil erosion and stormwater permits. Findings of fact per section 94-283, proper site drainage will be provided so that the removal of surface waters will not adversely affect neighboring properties or public storm drainage system. The provision for parking and for vehicle and pedestrian circulation on the site and onto adjacent public street will not create hazards to safety and will not place demands on public services more than capacity. Off-street parking areas have been provided in a manner that will minimize noise, glare, odor, and other effects to uses on the site or on adjacent properties. Drive streets and other elements have been designed to promote safe and efficient traffic operation within the site and shall provide safe and efficient vehicle access to and from the site. Exterior lighting will not create undue hazards to motorists traveling on adjacent public streets, nor damage the value or diminish the usability of adjacent properties. Lighting will be adequate for safety of occupants or users of the site, and landscape buffers will be preserved or provided to ensure that proposed uses will be adequately buffered from one another and from surrounding public and private property.
Support.
Just one clarification, I think that you alluded to the lighting on there. As Paula pointed out, that's a case where we generally require lighting, and they've offered some reasoning for not lighting that area.
Yep.
So this is is accepting their reasoning and not requiring lighting on this particular site.
Correct.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? There being none, we'll take a vote. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you. Keep up the great work. That's a great a non-motorized system for the area. Next item on the agenda is case number 23-028. This is going to be opening up a adjourned public hearing, and as we prepare for the reopening of it, Paula, if you can just give why don't we take it off the table first? Perhaps that is.
I make a motion, take the case off the table for, what is this called? Greenridge Townhouses.
Okay.
Support.
Okay, we have a motion by Tyler, supported by Scott, to remove from the table the public hearing at hand. And now we turn and we take, so we'll take a vote. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Now we turn it over to Planning Director Paula Preby.
Thank you, Chair. This is a case that there's a bunch of different moving pieces, so I put together a presentation, hopefully keep everyone on the same page, and I'll just start going through here. So there's just a brief site history. It was a golf course and country club, the site for a very long time. That stopped in 1988. The property was purchased by a developer. Components of that large approved PUD, planned unit development, were built, including Greenridge Square, think Target and Best Buy, as well as Greenridge Apartments. This site that we're talking about today had an approved plan in 1988 for 186 condominium units. That plan was not built, and the PASP on that site expired. As part of that, the neighbors were very involved at the time, and there was a consent judgment settled between the developer and several adjacent neighbors in 1989. The site was purchased by the current owner in 1998. Application history. So this is the third time this particular case is coming back to the Planning Commission. It was tabled with requests for additional information both of the previous times. In addition to the additional information requested being provided, there are a few other changes with this submission, including a reduction in units from 186 to 162, which is 24 fewer units. There's also some changes to the layout to cluster the units and shift them to the west on the property. So here is an overview of the plan at a glance, and you can see the existing conditions there as well. Areas marked in green, that is labeled as preliminary no disturb area, approximately 13.5 acres. And areas marked in blue are preliminary open space areas, so those areas where some disturb will take place. There will be site grading, landscaping, etc., but ultimately that will be retained as open space. Some details of the project as it is presented at this time. It's 162 two-story townhouse units in a mix of 4 and 6 unit buildings. New private streets, 2 access points to North Center Drive. As an important note, no road connection is proposed between Greenridge Drive to the east and the proposed development. There's stormwater detention ponds on both the north and south edges of the development area of the site, as well as some other facilities and amenities for residents that would live in the development. A preliminary area site plan is a process the city goes through for planned unit developments, or PUDs. There's usually a multi-step process. First is the preliminary area site plan, PASP. That's what we're talking about tonight. This is the first step in a process toward this development existing. If it is approved, generally, there is a second step that goes along with a PASP application, and that is a rezoning application to rezone a site to a planned unit development district. This site already has that zoning in place, which makes it a bit of a unique case. Subsequent steps for the project, if it were approved today, include each different phase of the project returning to the Planning Commission for final area site plan approvals, FASP, before any building permits or site work can be done. So this is, again, the first step in a process, and is back with some more information. Another thing that needs to be considered at this time is what the density of the site is, because there's an existing moratorium in Walker through the beginning of May of next year on residential developments with a density of greater than 3.5 units per acre. The master plan states that density is calculated by first determining whether a proposed development is a cluster development or a conventional development, and then applying the appropriate density calculation. It's slightly different depending on the type of project. A cluster development pulls the amenities of the development closer together, preserving open space around the developed area. And for a cluster development, we use gross density calculations, very straight units per acre. A conventional development utilizes the full developable area of the property for dwelling units and associated private yards. For a conventional development, we use something called practical density, where 20% of the total acreage is reserved for infrastructure, roads, stormwater, etc. So that is taken out of the total acreage, and then you calculate units per acre with that lowered acreage. This is important to figure out for this site. These are the examples, just illustrative examples existing in the master plan for a cluster development and a conventional development. Here is the River Ridge Townhome overview within that. It is the staff view that this is a cluster development, so I would recommend using gross density to calculate what the density is. But it has been brought up as a gray area. Wanted to make sure it is clarified tonight, and before moving forward with the review of the project, we clarify the density of the site so everyone is on the same page. So that looking at the site, it is my opinion that it is a cluster development. There's also correspondence from my predecessor when this project initially came to the Planning Commission back in May of last year, that she stated that we, speaking on behalf of the city, consider this a cluster style development, so gross density calculations should be utilized. However, with the moratorium, think it's very important that this is clarified as part of the public record. So I wanted to take a pause and see if there were any questions from the Planning Commission regarding the density calculations and whether or not this project falls underneath the moratorium.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. Yeah, I think this is a key part of the conversation. And I think as we looked back at the reviews, especially as recent as February, coming into this evening, staff has requested that the Planning Commission make a call as far as whether or not it's a cluster development or a conventional development. I guess we got that between one or the other. At this point, I think it'd be helpful if we have a conversation about that based upon what's at hand and come to a consensus one way or another. Scott, I'm going to put you on the spot first and get your perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean, reviewing the standards for cluster development, the designs and situated to minimize alteration of natural features, lots and buildings arranged in ways to relate to surrounding properties and improve views of buildings, lots, building, parking situated to avoid adverse effects of shadows, noise, traffic, open space easily accessible by pedestrians, and based on the interpretation by staff, I guess I would say it is a cluster development.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, I would agree with that analysis as well, but the only thing that kind of sticks with me right now is these cul-de-sacs. Are we gonna approve them that way, or do we wanna have more connection? Because that's always the goal of our system, is to have more connections. And if we did that, would that then turn that into a conventional? So that'd be my only, say if, right now it's a cluster, but if we change those cul-de-sacs, and I say to move into a conventional. So I know that kind of leaves it gray again, but that's where I stand.
Okay, thank you.
I tend to disagree. To me, I don't see clustering in the sense that I would interpret it, and I think that I think it's tough to, it's a tough task, right? It's not outlined in a way that provides a crystal clear picture of exactly what is and is not clustering, but and this is just me, but to me I think this is not imposing on the areas that are easy to not impose on for the development, but it's not intentional in avoiding disturbing the areas, not disturbing the topography of the site specifically. I think it's just kind of, it looks like a traditional development to me. So I guess that's where I stand on it, but that's me.
Okay, thank you. Tyler?
Well, I think I have an opinion on this. I usually do. In looking at what's up on the screen right now, I mean, the center one looks more like the right one than the left one, obviously. I'm just stating facts. But then I would put the onus on the developer to tell us what they did to create a cluster. Because I would like to see this if it wasn't clustered. Because right now you got your retention basins, you got your buildings and everything right up to the 150-foot line. You can't go any different there. You can encroach on the wetlands, which are delineated. So I think the developer has to show us, okay, this is a cluster, but this is what it wouldn't be a cluster. Because right now, in my opinion, I agree with Steve, the one on the right, the conventional development, matches it much more than the one on the left. So I need some help from the developer.
Okay. All right. Mark?
I'm leaning towards that it is a cluster development, but I'd like to reserve and listen to the developers, why they think it's a cluster development and why we should approve it that way.
Okay. And then from my perspective, terms of a cluster development, in terms of focusing the development, the building areas in this case, and preserving natural features. I feel that is being accomplished with this design. But I guess to the point, so we've got some perspective from each of us at this point. If we could have a representative from the applicant come forward, if you can identify yourself, address, and share with us.
Thank you. My name's Pat Lennon. Excuse me. I'm an attorney with the Honeyman Law Firm, based at 650 Trade Center Way, Kalamazoo, Michigan. Here tonight on behalf of the applicant, Jade Pig Ventures Riverridge LLC. Speaking to the issue of clustering, we obviously contend this is a cluster development. And beyond that, we've been relying on really the city since 2022 with respect to that characterization. It's specifically designed as a cluster development, and I'm going to invite Suzanne Schultz up for a second, and she can speak specifically to each of the elements of cluster development that are set forth in section 94-214C2, where they're all laid out. You know, these opinions were initially expressed to us in 2022 when the project began. That was before the first public hearing. Now we've had 3 plans developed that, well, really 3.5, considering all the extensive changes made to the most recent plan earlier this week. So all of these plans have been prepared and made in reliance on this understanding that this is a cluster development, that the general density calculation would be applied, and that is what's guided the project for nearly 2 years. So to hear that it's being considered differently now is a little disappointing and concerning, but we hope that after talking through the specific elements, which I think we have a slide, don't we? I don't know if you can pull that up, but we'll pull up a slide that talks about the elements of a cluster development and how this is even more cluster development now than it was originally. And if you even go all the way back to the original PUD that was approved, I want to say in 1989, how it's evolved into what in our view is very clearly a cluster development. So I'll invite Suzanne Schultz up from Progressive, who can speak directly to the actual elements and how we've, I would say, tried to adapt the project to not only the feedback we've received from staff, but from the whole community. And I hope they all agree that what they see today is a vast improvement over what originally came before them. And that hasn't been achieved without a lot of effort. So we appreciate your consideration. And this is Suzanne.
Good evening, Planning Commission. So I've actually had the benefit of, this is the first time you've seen me, for better or worse. So so I came in late to this project, worked for Progressive, but I wasn't involved with the early iterations. And so the good and the bad of that is I'm able to kind of take a look at the whole thing, like the whole history of the project, kind of how we got here is sort of, my dad always told me never to be an attorney. No offense to Jeff and Pat. But I always joke maybe I should have been a mortician because I like doing autopsies on things and figuring out why we got here and what happened and how things are working. And in this case, when we talk about Riverridge and the design of it and the change in the design, and we've even had another iteration of a change in design based on the neighbor input. But before we get to all that, I'll talk about why it is a cluster development, but then also what a conventional, which is not a question I had expected, what a conventional would look like. But so I won't cover what the purpose of a PUD is, but in stepping back and kind of thinking about more broadly kind of what's the purpose of a PUD, usually it is to provide that flexibility and looking at an overall site and thinking about the open spaces and clustering and figuring out your infrastructure and the most efficient use of that infrastructure. I mean, that's usually why you do a PUD and not a plat.
when you're doing that, and also providing that flexibility when you're thinking about zoning. And that was really the whole point of Greenridge, is thinking about those land use transitions, going from the intense development along Alpine and then going to higher intensity residential to more moderate and residential, even though it's zoned high density for the RPUD2. Into the lower intensity residential. So the townhouse concept was something that, for a developer, was something that he really thought was important, both to buffer the lower density residential from the high density, but then also to provide a different type of housing option that isn't really available in the area, especially near shopping in that area. So when we talk about the zoning, so as Paula had mentioned, our PUD was approved in '89 for 3.7, and the 24 units were eliminated. The gross density, and we look at the cluster is intended to develop only certain portions that preserve a significant amount of land. This is the memo that was provided by Paula's predecessor, Tricia Anderson, about the cluster development and using the gross density. And for the clustering, you have a series of criteria, which I'm going to mention kind of why, which was already referred to by Mr. Funk. So the lots, buildings, streets, and parking areas shall be designed and situated to minimize alteration of the natural features and topography. This redesign was intentional in that actually there's less grading on the site than there was in the original proposal that you reviewed the prior 2 times. It works and it allows for more tiering on the site, so it's more sensitive to the landscape than the prior version. And also, it significantly pulled back, especially on the northern end, from the county drain, and that area where the drain commissioner wanted that area avoided. A lot was pulled back, and I have another image to show you about the intricacies of that, actually, which relate to the question of what would a conventional subdivision look like. So we really try to work with the natural features, be very sensitive to what was there, as well as to the neighbors, which really talks about those improved views of buildings. So when you look at the layout of the site, you've got basically streets that almost serve as alleys in a way, because they're rear-loaded garages, so the fronts of the homes are facing on green spaces. So everything is facing on green spaces in all of those areas, and the neighbors to the back are looking at the short end of buildings now. The old version that you had, they were facing, all the home fronts were facing the neighbors in that cycle, and I'll show you the old version, but we rearranged it so the views for the neighbors are better. They have more green space to look at with those gaps in between, and they also have the short ends of the buildings to look at rather than longer, the full view of a 4-unit or a 6-unit building. Also for the clustering, the lots, buildings, and streets and parking areas situated to avoid the adverse effects of shadows, noise, and traffic. And in this case, this is not connected, as been mentioned, to the surrounding neighborhood. Neighbors have been very insistent. They do not want Greenridge to be connected to this development. So it does not connect. And then also the traffic that is done, the vehicular circulation that happens at the backs of the buildings. And so, and with the fronts of the buildings facing almost all of them, the green space, with the exception of just the ones on the frontage road. We've tried to make that as much as livable and green as possible with that clustering intent, with this almost like green sandwiches in between those areas. The diversity and originality of the lot layout and individual building design shall be encouraged to achieve a more compatible relationship between the development and the land. I mentioned somewhat that tiering that we try to do with the step downs, but then also it is a more innovative design rather than just everybody having kind of splitting every single thing up into different block sizes. Having those common communal green spaces builds that sense of community. It's become a much more standard type of design that when you're looking at kind of medium density neighborhoods they're trying to build,
when you have a playground and you have common green space, it makes it much more usable. It's not just green space for the sake of green space, or a big side yard setback, or a big front yard setback that really doesn't become usable space. These green spaces in between these units are highly usable because that's where people can congregate and join together as neighbors. And then cluster open spaces intended for recreation of public use shall be easily accessible to pedestrians. Open space intended for scenic value shall be visible from a significant number of units or buildings. And I think I pretty much already covered a lot of those reasons. But again, both for the neighbors, we've preserved, and you'll see a redesign. I mentioned those cul-de-sacs have been pulled out of that 150-foot buffer area based on the comments we've heard from neighbors, so I'll show you that. So both between the buffer area as well as the spaces in between, we've preserved quite a bit of views for the neighbors, as well as both the top and the bottom portions that will be completely untouched as part of the development. So that's why we both, in addition to being consistently, having consistently submitted based on the gross density calculation, being reinforced by staff, and doing that for our calculations, that's why we also believe it's a cluster development. To the question on why we think it is, what does a conventional subdivision look like? I actually, Brandon, our engineer, leaned over to me and he goes, well, it's that plan we just talked about. So part of the autopsy I talked about, and when I was looking through the staff page just the other day, yesterday, I think, I said to Brandon, I'm like, why does this McKenna plan keep coming up from the site plan? I haven't been involved in your master plan process. I don't have that much history, but why does it keep coming up? And I know you just updated your master plan. I know you're trying to implement that in your zoning ordinance. But one of the challenges when I'm looking at that, having worked with this site now for quite a while, as we're trying to puzzle over the right design that actually works with the land and tries to meet the objectives for the neighbors, is what is it about this plan and what are the challenges? And so from a conventional subdivision standpoint, this is a more conventional subdivision piece. It's recommending connecting to Greenridge, which is not what the neighbors want. And it is lining edges and connecting those streets. It's also significant in that it's really everything we're trying not to do with our proposed development, it's working against it. It's building in the county drain, on regulated wetlands, on steep slopes, on top of the private utilities. The neighbors they didn't want the bike path, they didn't want the connection to Greenridge. And the older wooded areas that are further to the south, there's development proposed there that we didn't want to do. And I can get more into kind of those intricacies of those challenges, but this is the actual the current topography, and that red line is where the county has said, don't cross this line. This is the area to be protected. So when we look at kind of how a conventional plan would lay out on a site like this, we know it won't work. We had to do a cluster development to be able to fit the units on this site and to work with the property. So I hope I answered both of those questions.
At this point, commissioners, if you want to ask some questions for further clarification.
So what you're saying is, because you can't build in certain areas, it's now a cluster development.
That's part of the whole
You can't build in a right of way.
provisions.
You can't build in a wetland, right? Because you can't build into it, it's now a cluster?
Correct. That's why you have cluster provisions.
Yeah, I would like to add to that as well. It's a cluster because it meets the requirements of C2, which identify what cluster developments are. And I think Suzanne did a very good job of ticking off how the proposed development addresses A through E in that part of your ordinance. And so by definition, since it satisfies those standards, it is thereby a cluster development. What is intriguing that she raised, and I thought provided a great contrast, is the, quote, idealized plan that was put forth by McKenna some time ago is really a conventional development. And it is something that, you know, I think we would all agree is much less appropriate for this property. So the cluster development that's being proposed would be a better fit.
Well, first of all, the McKenna development can't be done because it would be in the 150-foot no disturb zone. It
Understood.
would also be in the wetlands, so it can't be done. Now, using that as an example, those already can't be done. What I'm saying is, you're saying this is a cluster development because of natural features and because of a ruling that you can't build within 150 feet. So, shouldn't those natural features in 150 feet of buffer zone be reduced for the density? In other words, the square acres should be reduced in the calculation because those can't be used anyway. Correct?
So there's two pieces. One,
I'm just asking, is that correct? Those pieces can't be used.
I can't infer that based on what your master plan says or what your zoning ordinance says.
I'm going by your maps, the wetlands and the 150-foot buffer. I'm going by what you guys are pointing out here. And I'm not just trying to be argumentative. I just want you to prove that you deserve the leniency of density because it's a cluster development.
I don't think the criteria is whether or not it's deserved, it's whether or not you meet the criteria for doing a cluster plan. And we've met the criteria for the cluster plan. And the whole point of doing a cluster plan is to preserve the natural features on the site and to work with the land. And that's what we tried to do.
Right, but I also said to you earlier.
Let me just add on to that too, because I think it addresses your question even more specifically, because once you qualify as a cluster plan, then you're eligible for the gross density calculation. And that is what you're encouraging, because you'd rather have a project like the one that's been redesigned as opposed to really the first 3 iterations of this project, and even more so than the one proposed by McKenna. You know, that's what your ordinance says.
I've already eliminated McKenna. What I'm saying is, you show me the map of your layout and show me what you would do different that wouldn't be a cluster on the land that's allowable to be built
So,
on.
Tyler, if I can just add a little bit to
Sure.
the context of what you're saying, because I think I understand what you're trying to get at, is that when we think, apparently just Tyler and I think about cluster development, a lot of our intention with offering the benefit of that changed density calculation is to preserve more of the site beyond what is undevelopable, but to take what is developable and shrink that footprint into yet a smaller amount of that space to preserve more of that open area. And the intention for us is not to preserve the already undevelopable space on the site, right? That's kind of, I think, where the miscommunication is happening here, that to my sense, my feeling is that really in terms of what is developable, you are pretty well extended into that space, right? There is some preservation in between the cul-de-sacs, and I think that is a nice feature for a townhome complex, but I don't think it necessarily gets at what we're trying to and intending to do with the idea of clustering. And I do also want to address just a comment that you made about the fact that the clustering is a benefit that you've been seeking to develop this on contingent for the project since the last 2 years have gone by. I struggle with that a little bit because when I look at the 1989 plan to the plan that was submitted in 2022, I don't see, I guess, the stark contrast in how it was planned to be developed at that time in 1989 to what was submitted when you started this process with us. So,
Well,
I
think
think there's two things here at play. One is the debate about the cluster development came in because of the conversation about the master plan. This property is zoned RPUD2. Part of that zoning was for the residential condominiums at 3.7 units to the acre. Right, so that's what it was approved for. And that is what the zoning has been on it for 34 years. So and our understanding has been that, you know, when we look at the density, all you have in your zoning ordinance is looking at the zone district is that's the reference to the zone district. We have the zone district in place as I just described. There's no mention in your zoning ordinance about anything about how to calculate density. It's in your master plan, which is a policy document. There's nothing regulatory that you have about excluding the wetlands from the density calculation. There's nothing that you have in the ordinance about, in fact, it's not even mentioned, I've included it someplace. There's not even, you don't have those things in your ordinance as law. You talk about what's approved under the zoning, which is the 3.7 units to the acre. We've now lowered it to 3.3 units to the acre. So we meet the zoning. So I would argue we already meet that, and the only reason that this has come up is because of the question raised by staff about the master plan. But we'd argue that we already have this allowable density regardless of what the master plan says, because that's a policy document, and we already have the zoning.
I agree with you. But there's also a moratorium that came into effect. The moratorium could very easily have said 3 units per acre. Look at the people behind you. It's not us. It's the community that is throwing a fit about these high-density residential things going in. The pressure is on, first of all, the city commission, and then it's on us too. Now, are we supposed to listen to what's going on, or are we supposed to blindly do things? I mean, there's always interpretation. So that, really, that's all I've said my piece. I'm kind of done. I
Yeah.
agree with Steve.
Yeah, so I guess my follow-up question to what your comments are is that it's, your point is that it doesn't matter whether or not it's a cluster development, you guys are compliant regardless, that's the point you're bringing forward.
It's true either way. It is a cluster development, and the zoning should be calculated that way. But even if it weren't, we'd still comply.
Okay, I'd like to add some perspective on it as well. I think as we look at this development, I look back at what was reviewed back in 2022 and again this spring, February. I had great concerns about those plans in terms of the way they were laid out. It was really, as you look at where the developed area is going to take place, it was going to be basically flattening that out, and a wide swath of the property was going to be stripped of the vegetation, and the grade was going to be flattened out. As I look at what's been submitted most recently, I think that's much more sensitivity is reflected in this plan in terms of there's going to be some tree preservation is I think a challenge here, and they've given some characterization of what it might look like based upon the plan that was developed back in 2022 and now the one that was in early 2023. But as we go there, I understand that there was a meeting with not only with staff in the past week, but also with the neighbors talking about it, and they've come up with even they've reduced some of the additional units, and it's made it, I think, in my mind, more sensitive to the grades in that area. They use the term of tiering of the property. That's where you've got some grades out there, and I know most everybody that's out there has walked through that area, and you're quite aware of the ups and downs that take place on the property. And from my standpoint, I was part of that group that back in 2022 where we walked the property, not only with city staff, but planning commissioners and neighbors in the area. And that's one thing that really struck me, is that there was a constant change in grade throughout the property. And again, as I look at this plan, I think it's sensitive to that. I think we still have to work very closely. This is a preliminary area site plan. A final site plan has to be submitted for the actual construction on it. And between the preliminary and the final, we've got to really fine tune it in terms of not only sensitivity to grades, but also the preservation of the natural vegetation that's there. So that's where I'm coming from in terms of why I view that as a cluster, is that I think it is in the spirit of that, if not the letter of it. And I think, but there's more work that has to be done, and I think that's acknowledged not only by staff and the planning commission, but also the developer and the neighbors, that in order to do it right, if it's going to be developed, it's going to take that sensitivity. At this point, we've had some conversation, and staff has asked the planning commission to offer its impression, whether it's cluster or not. Do we want to have some more dialogue on that, or are we at a point where we can, we've had some expression of this, but to formally say cluster or not?
I would not want to see a vote before public comment on that, respectfully, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, just, the only question, if I'm understanding the chair correctly, the only question is whether the planning commission believes that this meets the criteria for a cluster development or not. This is not part of the PASP review. The PASP review is that which is the subject of the public hearing this evening. So with due respect, I believe the planning commission can proceed with this administrative determination, understanding that all that does is move us on to the PASP review, where the public will in fact have ample opportunity to speak.
Okay, at this point, are we at a point to,
What's the harm in letting the public speak?
sir, there will be time in this,
Not before the vote, there won't.
well, from my perspective, I think we can move forward and take this straw poll on it, but I don't want to, I want to get the perspective of the other commissioners.
For my part, and this is just me, but I think that, I think it would be worthwhile to hear from the public first. We're gonna have to do it at some point in this meeting. And I think that as the developers have had their opportunity to make the case on it, it's worthwhile to collect the feedback before we start taking action.
Okay? Pat?
I'm sorry. I don't mind, I shouldn't have interrupted, I'm sorry. I don't mind that perspective, but when somebody gets up there, they either say it's cluster or not. No other opinions, because that's all we're talking about then. So you can walk up, you can say it's cluster or it's not. And then that, if that's what we're going to proceed with, that we're going to listen to the public hearing on one item, it needs to stick to that item.
Well, I think the public hearing is for the overall project.
It is.
And we were looking to do this as an interim to get some direction on it. But that's where I'm looking for, if there's openness to deferring that until we go through the complete review. I think I'm hearing that from Steve.
For my part, I don't mind just moving to the public comment part of our meeting to get feedback. I guess for me, what do we have left prior to that, right? We have, Scott, have you even given us engineering feedback yet? Paul?
I have a significant portion of the review and overview of the project. I would
Okay.
like to share before the public hearing as well
Okay.
as the engineering
Yeah,
review.
so the question
If-
is, do we then wanna, okay.
Yeah. Tyler?
Yeah.
So you're,
I would say we just vote on it, but on whether it meets the cluster or not, because if it doesn't meet the cluster, things change. The way it sounds is it's gonna pass, in my opinion.
okay. Mark, any?
Whether or not we should vote or not?
whether we should defer until we've had the public comment portion of the meeting.
I don't see, I don't see either way. I'm fine with, say, or wait until after the public comments.
Okay. Pat?
I'm okay with us just voting on this particular issue first and making that call without the public.
I think that also just for purposes of getting our vernacular correct, I would caution us on calling it even a vote. It's more of coming to a consensus on a, administrative piece of business, right? It's kind of getting opinion poll of the commission at this point. It's not, I wouldn't call it formal action, would it?
Well,
Okay. Sir, at this point, we're having conversation at the commission. This is a public meeting. There'll be time for, invite that comment, but we want to address this issue. Scott?
I agree. I don't think I'm ready to move forward with a determination on this issue.
Okay.
yeah, I think, from my perspective, I believe if we're making a determination, however we want to phrase it, it's a vote. And this is an administrative determination being asked of the Planning Commission. That's all it is. This is not a decision on the PASP. But if the decision of the Planning Commission is that this is not a cluster development and that in fact the density is not less than 3.5 units per acre, then presumably, as the Vice Chair has pointed out, we're done. The moratorium kicks in and that's the end of this discussion. So in order to even have the discussion, to even have the public hearing tonight, I think you, as a preliminary matter, have to make a determination that they're under the threshold or not.
Okay.
So.
All right, with that, why don't we proceed with the vote on whether cluster or not?
How do you want to hold everybody? You just want folks to start?
Okay, Scott?
I believe it has been, the standard for a cluster has been met, so I would say it is a cluster development.
Okay. Pat?
I vote for cluster.
I'd be a no on that.
It's not a cluster.
I agree with what I see here and what I've seen on the plans and what staff has said and what the developer said. I believe it's a cluster development.
Okay, as I do as well. So in this case, we've got 6 members here, 4-2. So the administrative decision is that it's considered a cluster development, and we'll proceed on. And at this point, we'll turn it back over to the Planning Director, Paula Preby, to take it from here.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Board. Let's move forward to the items raised in my staff report regarding review of the project. One was regarding cul-de-sacs. I identified that our standard is that cul-de-sacs and dead-end streets with only one point of entry should not serve more than 25 dwelling units. There are several in this case that do. It's a guideline, not a hard limit. There are many that exceed that number. In conversations between myself and the city engineer, I believe that these are acceptable cul-de-sacs that exceed that number. This is more of a, not anything that would stop the project, in my opinion. Moving on to consistency with the master plan. As part of the review of a PASP, the Planning Commission must find that the project is in compliance with the city's general development plan, that is our master plan, and the effect of the PUD on that plan. So in my opinion, my professional opinion, the master plan is relevant to our conversation today. There are several notes in the master plan regarding the site. According to the future land use plan and the community character map, The properties identified is neighborhood preservation, that is the tan color on the map that you see on screen, as well as preserved open space overlay, that is the green hashing. There's also a footnote, there are a few of these sprinkled throughout the plan. The topography east of North Center Drive lends itself to preservation of open space between the retrofit mixed-use area to the west, that's what's marked red, and the neighborhood preservation area to the east. And then there's a general note for neighborhood preservation areas. When there's undeveloped land, it should be developed with similar character and density to the surrounding homes or acquired by the city as new park space. It's a general note regarding these areas. In this case, with a single-family development on one side and a high-density apartment complex on the other side. Townhomes are the bridge between them, and therefore, I believe, meet that, that it's a similar character and density question. As was brought up earlier, there is a report from our professional planning consultant, Mr. Christopher Corey from McKenna. Last year, he was asked to write a report regarding this site and what the master plan has to say about it. He concluded that based on the master plan, any development in the area should have the following characteristics: residential, somewhere between the multifamily on one side and the single family on the other, such as a townhome. Specific typologies, if they're mixed within the development, should be like against like. In this case, it's all of one type, so that does not necessarily apply. Hillsides and trees should be preserved as much as possible, and the master plan notes wanting to see a road connection, as has already been covered by the applicant. It is not very feasible with the topography on the site to connect north to 4 Mile due to the county drain. It is possible. If you ask an engineer, anything's possible. It is not very particularly feasible. The plan that was brought up by the applicant as well is in here. This was the conceptual layout. It's a two-dimensional drawing, kind of saying, if you put all the things that the master plan notes onto this site, what could it look like? This is one concept for what that could look like. It's a concept only, and showing what if there were mixed housing types and there were the road connection and there were large segments of preserved open space, what that could look like. As has been covered, it's not, again, particularly feasible or would be recommended in terms of preserving the site and the character of the site as it exists today. It is a conceptual drawing in our master plan, or not in our master plan, this is in regard to what our master plan has to say. The other major component in reviewing the site, from my perspective, is the tabling motion from the February 2023 meeting. A previous version of the plan came to the board. You were asked, the applicant, to provide more information in these specific 6 areas. Let's walk through them now. First, regarding a legal interpretation, the city is not a part of the consent judgment which established the 150-foot open space buffer area. We have been in close contact with our city attorney. He is here tonight. The consent judgment, however, is public record and reflects the neighborhood's understanding of the development parameters of the property for over 30 years. That historical perspective is a valid consideration according to the zoning ordinance sections regarding planned unit developments. I think it is relevant to be discussed. It is important to talk about and to try to minimize what is in that area. Regarding water on the site and water leaving the site, the board asked for more information. A new sheet, C400, regional drainage patterns, was added, showing how the drainage courses connect ultimately to the Grand River. And there's some narrative statements from the applicant as well, and showcasing communication with the Kent County Drain Commissioner's office. Further, note that there has been a reduction in units on the site from the previous plans. This is that new sheet that I mentioned added, sheet C400. You can see the development here. And then these are the existing water courses. To the north, we have the York Creek Alpine Walker Drain. To the south, there are 2 courses that run from the Greenridge area down toward West River Drive, eventually over toward North Park and into the river. So this was added to help meet that request for more information. Moving on to the updated wetland survey. There was a wetland survey provided with the February application. The ask this time was to verify that during the growing season. They provided a wetland boundary verification in addition to the previous report, and they found no jurisdiction changes apply to the existing wetlands upon verification, according to the letter. So the identified and delineated wetlands are shown on this map here from September. Traffic. A trip generation analysis letter was submitted with the application materials. The letter was not updated from the previous one submitted with the February meeting. There was updated email correspondence showing contact between the applicant's engineer and our local MDOT Grand Region office, stating that they conferred with the findings. Those findings are that expected to have minimal impact on existing traffic operations along adjacent roadways. Similar to stated before, the letter was not updated to reflect a lower unit count. There was a 13% reduction in units. You would expect a corresponding 13% reduction in trips generated from people living in those units. Tree cover comparison. 2 new sheets were added to the plan set showing trees as they were previously and as they would be cleared as part of the development if it were to move forward. There's a discussion regarding which trees to be kept, what a high quality tree is in the narrative provided by the applicant. They also state that the applicant proposes to plant the equivalent of more than 4 acres of tree canopy throughout the property to provide for high quality trees on the property in addition to other landscaping elements. So as on the left here, the tree cover from 1999 was provided by the applicant as an attempt to showcase what the condition of the property was like back when it was, more recently a golf course. It has since grown a little bit more wild, as you can see in the Google Earth image from 2022, which is on the right. Here, the trees to be removed is another sheet in the plan set. It's more significant. If I'm going back to the 1999 and now, you can see significant trees. A significant area will be cleared of trees as part of the development. The majority of those are in areas that were previously cleared and have grown in the last 20 years. That is possibly worth consideration by the Planning Commission. Finally, an endangered species report was one of the elements. There is a report included. It's the same as was submitted previously. You can go get one of these from the internet, from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services Information for Planning and Consultation. It's informational only, does not constitute an analysis of project level impacts. They found several species that, quote, are potentially affected by activities. Birds move around. They did note in the report that there are no critical habitats at this location. I feel that, in my opinion, this standard has been met. So with going through those planning and zoning concerns, I have one additional component to present to the board this evening before we move on to the engineer and his report. There's a revised plan the applicant would like to submit for consideration. I have been referring to these plans as the 1120 plan, which is the one that was shown earlier today. Was formally submitted with the application, and a new plan which is dated 12/4. Based on the neighborhood meeting the applicant held on 11/28, a revised plan was prepared and shared with staff. The cul-de-sacs were pulled to the west out of the buffer. There's a shift and change in the building type mix. With an updated plan, there are more 6-unit buildings and fewer 4-unit buildings, the same total number of units. And the south stormwater detention pond was pulled to the west, further away from the neighbors. This is the 1120 plan. And we have a plan that at a glance looks fairly similar. I'm hoping to illustrate the differences for you here. Side by side, if you're going back and forth, you can see some of those things. The cul-de-sacs pulled into the development, more 6-unit buildings, and the south stormwater pond shifted. Here again, you can see them. The 1120 plan is underneath in orange, and the updated new proposed 12-4 plan is on top in blue. You can see where no changes took place, and you can see where alterations have been made in response to the neighborhood meeting. Walker staff can see a way forward to approvals based on this updated 12-4 plan, with a few elements yet to be fully clarified. Thus, if that's the direction the Planning Commission wishes to go, I've provided the board with a motion for temporary approval with conditions. This is slightly different from our standard motion. If the board chooses to move forward, I'm happy to walk through that in more detail. It would add some conditions that would be met within the next 2 to 4 weeks and brought back for formal PASP approval. This is kind of a hybrid model that the city attorney and I worked on this week, because there is this updated plan that we believe is a significant improvement and therefore worth consideration despite the late hour. I'm happy to answer any questions or go back to any of the elements I covered. I know I went through a lot relatively quickly.
Thank you, Paula. Commissioners, any comments, questions?
Just real quick, the traffic study that you talked about, was that based on the old plan or this new plan? Because you said in February, which was still the old plan.
It was based on the old plan. That was a trip generation letter. I can let, I'm sure, Scott talk about that in more detail. The one comment I would make is it was not updated, but the units are reduced now, so we would anticipate. I'm gonna let Scott talk.
No, Paula did a great job with that report. I'm not going to cover all of those issues again, but I can certainly help answer questions as we move forward. I did discuss that with MDOT. I think the developer wanted MDOT to submit a formal report. We had told MDOT, that we collaborate all the time. We're very comfortable with, just an email kind of a correspondence. They're not concerned about the projections. It's good to know that the projections would be reduced a little bit, slightly with the reduction in units, but the impact to Alpine Avenue, which is really where our concerns come in, is in the 1% range. So it's insignificant when you think about the significance of Alpine Avenue.
Thank you.
All right. Again, commissioners, anybody else have any questions or clarifications at this point?
Paula, and maybe it's a question for Scott, is on this cul-de-sac issue, why is it a benefit to, why would we not want to give them approval on these cul-de-sacs? What's the reasoning to keep it to 25?
Well, traditionally, we look at a residential plat and we consider a single phase with 25 to 30 units as the maximum that we would allow off one inlet outlet. So that if you have a water main break, or you have a paving project, or an accident, any tree falls down, any one of those things, that's kind of our threshold for saying you really need to have a second way in and out. Now, we stretch those criteria a little bit when we get away from single family houses, because you generally have smaller populations in an apartment or a condo or a townhouse or something like that. So we've gotten up into the 40 to 50 range a couple of times. We really don't feel comfortable going past that. And it's really a planning commission discussion, because these are private roads, but we don't throw up an objection to what they've laid out here.
Another perspective on it is that in some cases, communities will limit the length of a street without a second means of access as a way to regulate that, so that preserves the safety factor of the area. Any other questions, Paula? Okay, at this point, Scott Connors, city engineer.
And again, Paula's report was great, covered a lot of issues, so when I'm done, we can tap into just about anything that you've got there, and we'll try to help you out. There is a secondary part to our report that was from our 1/24/23 memo back in January, and in order to kind of cover the same ground without continuing to give you the same information. We attached that with a couple of updates just for your reference. We certainly don't need to go through that again. But one of the big things was that when we review a plan like this, especially when we've got a full room and we've got lots of contentious issues, we want to make sure the plan's sealed by a professional engineer. That wasn't this time, but we did get that just before the meeting, which makes us feel a whole lot better to make sure that that's in compliance with state law. So drainage has been one of the bigger issues. This site, as a recap, sheds in two different directions. The north half of this sheds to what we call the Alpine Walker Drain, which flows north and east to 4 Mile Road. That is a very sensitive watershed. It's very steep. The banks are quite cut from what we've seen on Alpine Avenue over the last 30, 40, 50 years. Certainly when you go from a 2-lane road along a golf course to what we see now on Alpine Avenue with all that development, the water is going to increase dramatically. About 15 years ago, we started to implement a lot more stringent stormwater rules, and so we've made up a lot of ground there. I think the Alpine corridor has seen developments like the new Chick-fil-A, like the Kmart that turned into Alpine Summit, many other developments where we've been able to fix the sins of the past, so to speak, and put in new detention ponds, new stormwater quality, underground basins and things like that. So it's gotten better, but that doesn't mean that it's fully repaired. And so we do want to watch that north district very closely. We talked last time about working with our neighbors, Plainfield, Alpine Township, and Kent County Drain Commission. We have reached out to them. You'll see in my report that it says that we'd like to do that. Well, since we wrote this report, we have actually had that meeting, and we had a good discussion about the potential of grabbing some regional detention here. I think that's a real feasibility and a real possibility with this development if it moves forward. We're going to have some talks with Alpine Township and with the developer about how we would cost share on something like that. That has not happened yet. It's not the appropriate time for that, but that's certainly, it would become very appropriate if the PASP was approved or moved forward in some kind of a conditional manner, and Alpine Township was willing to have those discussions. So that would happen if this was to move forward. Also, there was some work that was done since the January meeting. There were a lot of concerns pointed out about potential failures in that drain, and there was somewhere in the neighborhood of $60,000 worth of work that was done, and it was funded about 2/3 of it by the city of Walker. All that work was performed by the Kent County Drain Commission because it's in a Kent County drain. So that just buys us a little extra time out there. That kind of repair has to happen on a pretty regular basis because of how steep this watershed is. So on the south side, the water from this area would go into the drain that's shown on the very bottom of this site here with the little wetland area, I suppose is the best way to describe that. So that's the same place the water is outletted from the Greenridge apartments that's on the other side of Center Drive. We did have some luck with convincing the developer to move that detention pond a little bit further west, so we think that's a positive impact. But that also is a very steep watershed, and we have to keep our eye on that. That is not part of a Kent County Drain Commission outlet. That would be purely between us and Eagle if they come into play in terms of wetlands. But further discussions and I think a little further study is going to have to take place there. They need to do more than just build a detention pond, and that has been impressed upon us by staff and certainly local institutional knowledge and intuition there. So one good thing to note is that their detention pond has been sized, at least preliminarily, to have a significant amount more detention than they're supposed to have or required to have. So that's a great thing. It's a great sign from the developer that they're trying to do make some improvements there. If this again moves forward, we'd have a lot more discussion and probably some detailed review of how that would all work. Other things, there's certainly a lot of detail on the plans that we would want to see if this moved forward. Thinking about driveway details and some dimensioning and things like that, but it's really not required for the PASP. I think those are details that would be worked out as we move forward. Paula mentioned the cul-de-sacs moving back. I think that's a very good improvement. I do have a note in there that talks about our desire to help enforce that 150-foot open space. buffer, although it's not our requirement. We certainly want to, hear from the folks and help avoid any kind of litigation, even if we're not involved. We want to do our best to kind of collaborate there, and I think some of our work may have helped a little bit with that to help push those cul-de-sacs back in. That's really it for us, but there's a whole lot of detail here, and if I can help answer questions, I will.
Again, commissioners, any comments or questions for Scott? Scott, if I could, go
One
ahead, Mark.
quick one. On the wetlands, Eagle, when does they typically get involved? It says here that they're a final say on this, on I guess the boundaries. So what, should have been done already? Or?
No, it's very intensive to go after those wetland permits before you know what they're gonna be. So if we today were to approve this with some changes, and they already applied for the wetland permits, they have to start all over again to update those. It's a very long lead time. There's a lot of expense involved. So I wouldn't expect them to have those permits in place. This is a good design engineer that knows the rules. And so part of what we do at this point is really just kind of rough check some of those things to make sure it's feasible. Now, if it moves forward, they have to back that up and come up with those kinds of permits before they could move any dirt out there. And we would want to see that firmed up at least a little bit with the FASP to ensure that we're approving something that can be built.
Scott, one thing that I recall, again, there was a group of us that went out and toured and walked through the property back in 2022. And one of the things impressions I had, and we never had that meeting to follow up to kind of share our impressions, but one thing that hit me there was that on the northern portion of the site, northwestern portion, where the creek, those banks were really steep, it really struck me that how extensive that water, the impression it made through that area, the steep slopes, it seemed like it was very tenuous, and it makes me feel a little bit better. Positive about it is that we've renewed discussion with the Kent County Drain Commission and with our partners to the north to look at ways, and perhaps with the developers' participation as well, look at ways to improve that area there, to make it, I guess, heal it in many respects, so that we don't run into that again. So it doesn't get any worse. Is that your impression that we're moving in that direction?
Yeah, I think we've been moving in that direction for a long time. I would describe that area as very flashy. So if you hear on the weather, they talk about a flash flood. Well, a flash flood means right away. Very localized, very intense storms in a small area. It's very flashy. The Grand River, when that floods, is not flashy at all. That occurs 3, 4, 5 days later. So when you get into an area like this that has lots of pavement, very dramatic changes in elevation, it gets flashy like this. So it's gotten better, but there's no way that this water course is ever going to heal to be what it may have been 50 years ago because of the development that's occurred. The changes that are being made are all positive, and I think if we were to put a regional detention pond at the top of this, that would help to take some of the flash out of those events, because water would be impounded over time and released slowly so that you weren't creating the erosive forces that would wash those banks away.
Okay. All right, thank you. At this point, if we have no other questions for staff, we look to the developer, applicant, to come forward and provide your presentation.
Thank you. Some of the stuff I'll just burn through really quick. The kind of just in generally, as we mentioned, it's preliminary approval, and when we look through the criteria for preliminary, there's a lot of words of approximate, general. I mean, a lot of the detail, because of the complexity of this site, the full engineering that's gone on with the level of detail has been pretty extensive, especially with the number of times we've redesigned the site. So I want to assure you we're very familiar with the site, but the level of detail and the extent has far exceeded really what is involved with a preliminary plan review. We've also heavily coordinated, as Guy has mentioned, with the County Drain Commission and MDOT. Chriselle is here to talk about traffic. And then we also have Brendan Simon here to talk about stormwater if you have any questions. Just really quick, the plan evolution, just to cover kind of where we've been and where we changed. You already heard a lot about the plan, but I think even the 1989 plan speaks to the thinking of the day and the development. So you can see how many units were proposed right along in that northern portion. And how many now, we have very few units that are proposed in that northern portion because of the sensitivities to the natural environment. Do include the plan that was in the file in Walker when we looked at the blueprints. There is a section that I'll point out even further for stormwater detention because we talk about that 150-foot buffer. But that was a drawn-up plan. In April and May, you saw this plan that had the ring road, and I know there was a comment about the connections in the road there. In this plan, the townhouses really bordered along that 150-foot buffer edge. So we had that circle, but one of the challenges with this plan was that you had all of the rear garages were facing the buffer area, but you had green space behind them that nobody was really looking at except for a few units. So we wanted to redesign that, and also the grading, as you mentioned, really wasn't that sensitive. So we went back based on your comments, based on what the neighbors had said, and reevaluated and took another look at the site, and kind of came up after we had done some more engineering based on additional comments, and made some substantial changes. So as has been mentioned, we reduced by 24 units, which is the equivalent of 6 buildings. So those 4-unit buildings that were eliminated, so 6 structures. That it's equivalent of almost about a ½ acre of impervious surface that was removed. With this redesign, it actually will reduce it a little bit even more. We've clustered those units. We feel the design, and we talked to the neighbors when we had the open house last week. We really do feel that this is more sensitive to what's adjacent to the east of us. And then we've also preserved more open space. So almost 60% of the site is preserved as open space. That number also may change with some of these redesigns that we just recently did. Trees, I'll talk about those, but we're really intentional about how we want to use green infrastructure with the stormwater. Both trees, both for tree canopy, but then also for stormwater uptake. And then we further pulled away units away from the York Creek area. So you saw the green plan, which we discussed, but the additional changes that were made, the cul-de-sacs were mentioned, blended those driveways with those cul-de-sacs, and then moved, this is just more zoomed up so you can see what happened on the far southern end. 1 4-unit building was eliminated, and those 4 units then were reallocated to 2 other buildings, the 2 4s. So that's where we ended up with the 2 additional 6 instead. The developer would like to try to stick to 4s as much as possible. So if the plan, if we get PASP approval, we still might want to look at the numbers and how they fit exactly, just to make sure that it's the right fit. We would really like 4s more than 6s if possible. So we'll take a look at that a little bit more. We'll also finesse kind of how the driveways and the units fit so that it's more trued up a little bit better, so it aligns more. But we wanted to provide this illustration based off of the comments that we heard in the past week, and really try to demonstrate positive intent that we do feel like this is the best design for the site, and that we've tried to nestle everything in as best we can. So those are the big changes. I had mentioned the master plan before, and we talked about this already, and just the challenges with the steep slopes, wetlands, try to be sensitive to neighbors not connecting to those streets, accommodating the county drain, and doing all those pieces. So the feasibility of that plan vision that was in the staff page is really not feasible, and so we're trying to figure out what that looks like. But that's related to your master plans. The master plans come up as a discussion. The clustering that you just decided on is expressed in the master plan, so we do feel that it does meet the clustering. But then also, I think what's important, and I think this is where the contrast with the McKenna vision is, in that plan, you have the green space was like a donut, shown in this picture. So you have that green center piece, and then they push the units out towards the ends. And in this way, if you think about this new plan, it's almost like a barbell, and then you've got preserved green space on both ends, and actually with the 150-foot buffer in there, you've got this connection that goes all the way through to those other ends, which equals more than 23 acres of permanently protected green space that won't be touched. That's almost half the site, and that's a really conservative estimate. We haven't gone through and like specifically laid out all of the feet and inches on it yet, but if you took the linear feet of the 150-foot buffer, and you know, and we can talk more about what that looks like, but that 150-foot buffer in a lot of subdivisions, if you look, they might have a 50-foot path for, you know, a connection between homes or what that buffer area is, but that 150 undisturbed area is significant, and that equals just 10 acres on its own. That's not touched, and then you have those other areas. So 23 acres, almost half, and certainly that doesn't include all the green spaces in between all of the other sites or the area that's not even been calculated where the easement is located between the northernmost edge and the bigger cluster of units to the south. Just a brief mention, the consent agreement. You do have a letter from Attorney Pat Lennon about the consent agreement. Did want to I zoomed in on that blueprint that I mentioned where it does show stormwater in the buffer area. We're not proposing any structures in that area, so there's no fencing, no walls. It's just a depression to be able to store stormwater on a temporary basis. So that's kind of following exactly what was done back when there was the lawsuit. And Brandon can answer any of the questions. I don't know if you want to address it or if you want me to read the bullet points, but we as already been mentioned, we've gone through all of that, and email as recently as July 5 saying that you know, we don't need to go any further quite yet because we're still in the PASP stage. We've been working with the Drain Commissioner and having those discussions. And we commit obviously to doing more of that study once we know kind of what the plan is, and we had that assurances with the PASP before doing additional analysis, because you need to know that before you go spend all that money. But also speaking to the stormwater, the actions that we've taken to help with the stormwater is eliminating those 6 buildings, or 7, reducing that impervious surface, moving that stormwater basin further away from the neighboring properties. It is sized. We can commit to at least providing a minimum of 20% in excess of required, but we think we can actually get more in there for the 100-year storm. And really trying to serve an area that's historically been underserved from a detention standpoint, both to the north and to the south. So we're very committed to that. The other portion of that is that green infrastructure piece where I mentioned that this is part of the landscape plan where we talk about planting things like willows and other things that help with stormwater uptake. A lot of that's going to depend too on how much from the stormwater management standpoint, you know, the authorities are happy with, you know, feeling like whether or not it's going to clog it up or if it's going to clear and what, you know, you usually see those. So that's going to be the challenge, but we are going to work with everybody. Paul already covered the wetland survey. I do want to explain the forest cover just a little bit because I've dealt with this before, and one of the challenges is figuring out how you want to regulate trees. Currently, your ordinance does not, except for you do mention for the PASP review to identify trees to be preserved or added. And in looking at that and looking at the site as the golf course, those were assumed to be higher quality trees because when we look at the past 20 years, those would have been pioneer species. So the softwood trees like cottonwoods or box elders that would have come in just kind of on their own and started to grow. And so when looking at how do we provide additional tree canopy then to replace trees that have been lost in that, and then also not just, to replace those trees that were lost, assuming those were high quality trees that were covered during the golf course, but then also in consultation with Davie Tree Service, we had a conversation about what does this look like. The methodology that we used was what's used in Grand Rapids based off a tree canopy, because you can look at the caliper of the tree, but that doesn't necessarily give you the idea of the benefit when you look at canopy. And canopy is really where you get the better benefit in understanding the value of the tree and how it's going to work. So we identified in our landscape plan a series of trees that we think are appropriate for the site that will provide the canopy that we believe were lost. Based on those 4 acres, we've actually exceeded that number. But we also think that as we look at those other areas, kind of the repopulation of trees that would be lost from grading, one of the actually recommendations from Davie was that maybe you don't plant them and you let it go back to the natural state it was, just like it did for the golf course. So that will have to be a discussion as we talk about the landscape plan. But we wanted to make sure at a minimum we were matching the pre-golf, the golf course state, understanding that the pioneer species were there, and then what do you do with the pioneer species when you're reestablishing the vegetation? So does anybody have any questions on that? That was kind of the methodology we used. Okay. Chris is here to talk about traffic study. He actually did do a number. Do you want to proclaim what the number was?
Yep. Just briefly, it is based on 184 units originally. It has been reduced to 162. When you run the calculation based on the full development, add 162 units, the daily trips reduces by approximately 300 to about 1,100 total trips per day for that site.
Good job, Chris. And as you mentioned, we've been in contact with that. Endangered species, you heard from Paula about that. Picture of what the townhouses are proposed to look like. We did have a neighbor meeting, as we mentioned last week. About 50 people attended. We had 4 different sites, one on site design, one on landscaping, traffic, and stormwater and grading. We had lots of neighbor comments and questions. So one of those big questions was comments about Springbrook and Greenridge and whether or not there would be a connection there. And we said, no, we don't want, no one wants a connection. So we certainly understand that. I mean, especially when you come out of Springbrook and you're trying to turn, there's a really sharp hairpin turn and cars go really fast on the connecting street. So we understand why you wouldn't want connections there. We had comments about, at the ends of the cul-de-sacs, could landscaping be added? Certainly, we, when we do the final landscape plan, looking at additional landscaping on those ends and screening those more for neighbors. We even had one neighbor ask, if you're going to be ordering trees, and I'd like a couple trees to block my view, we're interested in that. One of the stations that we had for grading showed where homes sit versus the proposed development. Many of them sit higher or at the same level as the proposed development. So the proposed development's not sitting on top and looking down on them. And so we talked about that. And one of those was the houses were not quite representative of the existing houses that are there. So we had a request to change it. There was some discussion about owner occupied and rental rates and whether or not it could be considered to be condos. So they were concerned about kind of occupants. We got issues with lending, labor, lumber, land costs, all those L's when we're thinking about housing. But what was really interesting, there was just a report that came out from the National Association of Realtors about the median age of home buyers, and it increased from 31 in 1981 to 49 this year. And is really speaking to this huge change in rental market and who are renters and what do we think about renters. And you've got developers who are now doing single-family build-to-rent subdivisions where they're building single-family homes to rent. So the dynamic of who we think of renters is really changing from what it used to be, and people are renting a lot longer. Housing needs are different. The persons per household is declining, so there's more 1 and 2 person households. So just the whole housing dynamic is changing, and so for those reasons, the developer is planning on keeping them as renters, but you know those models do change. For example, Orion Construction is building them as apartments for when they're doing their townhouses, but with the future anticipation converting them to condos. So there's always, you know, there's these dynamics, but for right now, he's planning on doing apartments, rentals. But I thought that statistic was interesting of going from 31 to 49 for your first house. The detention basin there was a lot of questions about that and whether or not there would be a fence or no fence, whether to be standing water or how that would operate. So Brandon answered a lot of questions about that and how those things would work. And then we just had, the well question came up about the asbestos, and we did testing there and found no asbestos in those 5 sites that we tested. I think, what else do we have? Evaluating the drain commission, and then fences and traffic. So finally, kind of the findings. We encourage you, again, for the master plan, it is a cluster development. More than half of the site is going to be green space, and a permanently protected green space, as shown, again, that barbell idea where you're going to have these nodes of green space. Just on one end, 6.5 acres of green space is a lot of green space. That's going to be preserved and untouched. So I do think it does meet your master plan. It's just maybe not in the configuration when you were thinking in the McKenna plan in that same way, but that is a lot of green space that's not going to be touched on both ends, and then along that preservation area for the neighbors. Steep slopes are protected, wetlands are avoided. We're working with everybody on the drainage and working on that as part of the final approval. We're adequately served by public utilities and services. Streets don't connect to the neighborhoods. Streets are one of your criteria. We designed and situated the site to minimize impacts on adjoining neighbors. We've reduced the number of townhomes and moved them out of that buffer area to create those shared green spaces between those clusters, provide greater separation from the steep slope areas, and try to keep more of the densely developed areas closer towards North Center Drive. We're below the moratorium. We already covered that. A lot of this I've already talked about, so I won't read them all to you. But really, we feel that we meet all of your criteria that we've gone through and have worked really hard on this plan. I think it's nearly there. There's a lot of finessing that needs to be done as we get into final, and it's those little nuances. But really, it's going to be really, really hard to go anywhere from here without knowing we have PASP approval. So I don't know if Pat has anything to add, just to kind of enclose, but thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. That was remarkable. And as I mentioned before, we think this is a remarkable transformation of this plan. From Plan 1 to where it is now, we think is just incredible and progressive, and really our clients' commitment to work with the city and to work with their neighbors comes through in what they've done here. No more encroachments into the buffer area, pushing things away from the neighborhood, creating extra room for stormwater drainage, the tree cover. Those are just my personal observations. Actually, my presentation is much more boring than that. I'm an attorney, as you know, and so it's my job to explain how the progressive presentation applies to your ordinance and why we believe the PASP should be approved under your ordinance. As I explain that, please know I'm just trying to explain our analysis. This is how we look at it, from the legal perspective. I have the highest respect for this group and your legal team and everyone else. And I certainly don't want to say or suggest anything that could diminish any positive discussion or collaborative discourse. So we're here to try and get this into a place where everybody is comfortable with it and it can be approved. And we think it's that way right now. But as I sort of shift into my legal side of the talk, I want to begin by reminding everyone that this is a little bit of an unusual PUD consideration for you. Unlike most PUD applications, this application does not involve both a rezoning and a PASP plan approval. As we've heard today, this property is already zoned RPUD2 high-density residential, and it's been that way since the 1980s. This has two important impacts. First, since the proposed use is a permitted use, it means that the property owner has the legal right to establish the use on the property. We refer to these types of uses as legally permitted uses as by right uses. So the townhomes are what we'd call by right use. So you might hear me use that term a few times tonight. Second, since rezoning is not necessary, the Planning Commission is really only considering the portions of the ordinance that relate to the PASP review. The rezoning provisions of the ordinance don't apply. So when we really parse your ordinance and get into it, the way we read it, we're the Developers Council, is that the primary governing provision with respect to the PASP is section 94-213-2. This one, and I told you this would be boring, but this section is titled Preliminary Area Site Plan Requirements. Now, section 94-213-2 sets forth numerous requirements for a PASP. I believe there's something like 34 between the sections and subsections. So I'm pleased to share that the PASP plan that has been presented satisfies all of those requirements. And those are primarily objective type requirements for a plan, like a site plan approval. So for our purposes, we would contend that the requirements are met by satisfying that section, 94-2132, when the use is a by right use like this is. So if that is the case, we would contend that the PASP should be approved. Now, we understand and recognize and respect that the city contends that section 94-213-3E also applies to the analysis. And this is the section that has roughly 10 specific criteria that, in our view, go kind of beyond what's just in the plan. And we would contend that that section shouldn't apply for a few reasons. First, none of the listed elements in that section 94-213-3E ever mention a PASP or that it applies to the PASP. In our view, the PASP requirements are in 94-213-2. Second, virtually all of the elements, those 10 requirements, refer to the planned unit development. In this case, the planned unit development is in place. It occurred when the property was rezoned. So we would contend that the references to planned unit development are referring to a rezoning situation, not just the review of a PASP. And third, the 10 elements themselves, if you really get into them, and we will get into them because the city has gotten into them, the 10 elements themselves are all really proposed use related. None of them are specifically plan related, which differs from section 94-213-2. So, as I mentioned, due to the nature of tonight's meeting, we wanted to share that position with you. That's how we view it. But we also understand that the city applies all of those 10 criteria. And so we think that we comply with all of those anyway. So that would mean that fine with us. So if you agree with us that we've also complied with those, we all end in the same place. But as part of my boring job, I have to mention, how we read the ordinance for purposes of a meeting like this. So now, moving forward into section 94-213-3E, there are 10 elements. The first 5, I think, are pretty understood and accepted as being satisfied. So number 1 refers to the general character and substance of the proposed planned unit development. Well, we think, obviously, the character of this proposed unit development aligns with your expectations. Secondly, the objectives of the purposes served by the planned unit development. Well, you've heard Progressive talk about the housing situation and what this product will provide. So we think that one is also satisfied, but there's obviously more information in their presentation. Third, compliance with regulations and standards. Well, as you've heard, we have every intention of complying with all of the applicable regulations and standards. So that should also be satisfied. 4 and 5, the scale and scope of the development proposed, we think that's yes, sir. I'll wrap it up. I'll wrap it up. So there are a couple where we want to raise a concern. And the first is compliance with the city's general development plan. And I'd like to spend a moment on this because we would contend that if this is actually referencing the master plan as has been stated, the master plan is different from a zoning ordinance in how it affects a property owner. Master plan provisions are forward-looking, aspirational, and serve as a guide for future amendments to the ordinance. Only actual zoning ordinance provisions are binding and govern the questions involved. The master plan envisions future changes to the ordinance, but until those changes are actually incorporated into the ordinance, we contend they should not apply. However, in this case, as has been discussed by Progressive, even if they do apply or are applied, we contend those are satisfied. And we think that was demonstrated by Progressive's presentation. The second area that I think warrants some discussion are the impacts, which is number 7, of the plan development on facilities, on neighbors, et cetera. Again, I won't spend time on this other than to say I think Progressive and city staff have covered stormwater drainage sufficiently for purposes of a preliminary plan review. Similarly, we've adapted with respect to the buffer area established by the consent judgment and moved out of that. Third, I think we've addressed the traffic concerns that were previously raised and identified. Another requirement relates to the impact of the planned unit development on woodlands and wetlands. I think that is also satisfied based on the information provided by Progressive. So at the end of the day, we contend that whether this section applies or not, we've satisfied it, and that the property should be granted preliminary area site plan approval. And I think it's important to mention, as I wrap up, that the applicant has gone to considerable lengths to address conditions and requirements that we contend maybe shouldn't be applied, particularly at a preliminary review stage. But we've done it out of an abundance of a desire to work with the city and in a desire to work with our neighbors. And as you think about that, we would, I guess, ask you to think of our client, our developer, as one of the more sensitive and concerned community citizens that you'll have as a developer. And their commitment to this property, to the community, and to their neighbors won't stop after the project moves forward. And I guess in closing, we would also ask that almost 2 years of work has gone into this. This is our 3rd public hearing. We've done numerous studies, many of which are the reasons for the delays between the public hearings. We need a decision for a preliminary approval, and we hope it will be a preliminary site plan approval that we can take forward and move into the final approval process. So thank you for your time, thank you for your consideration, and we're glad to answer any questions. Thank you.
It's working now. It's working now.
Excellent. Maybe we can just use the speakers then. Thank you, Paula. You guys have been great. We appreciate your patience, and we know that you're committed to the community and have concerns about this. So this is a point at which we would like to give opportunity to take public comment. And in the interest of time, I know we've spent a lot of time on it already, but it's an important project. We'd like to have your comments limited to no more than 3 minutes. And please step forward if we can and offer the first commentary.
3 minutes and 15 seconds. I'll be as quick as I can. Logan Norton, 362 Dakota Drive. You all know I could talk for an hour about the flaws in the developer's plan, but I'm going to keep it brief and give the highlight reel of the top 10 reasons why the city should reject the developer's proposal. 1, despite being requested, the developer has still failed to provide a copy of the plan sealed by a professional engineer. 2, the developer put $0 towards fixing the Alpine Walker drain that took place primarily on their property. 3, put a fence around your detention ponds before one of my kids or one of your tenants loses their life. I want to repeat that the detention pond is a drainage structure and is prohibited from the 150-foot buffer zone. This plan continues to dump water issues onto Alpine Township. A 3-inch pipe is supposed to relieve the retention pond that's smaller than my toilet drain line. There's significant concern about that. If you'll refer to C305, you'll see the site grading exhibit, and the picture on top is my house, towering above the apartment, but the developer made an error when they placed the foundation of my home at 755 feet, when in reality it's 14 feet lower, which is only 4 feet higher than the nearest apartment will be. It's also convenient that they made my home appear nearly 35 feet tall when it's only 24. Again, it's just misdirection. The long and the short of it is that these buildings would be between 4 and 8 feet taller than my home, and every home that's on Dakota Drive, because we're all walkout basements, and 80% of our windows face the development. And the light pollution of a fully lit development would be horrific, and the headlights that are now going to blare through our windows as people do those circle drives at who knows what hour of the night. The developers still not had their wetland survey confirmed by Eagle, a requirement set forth in the last hearing. They didn't have their survey done in the growing season. They only had confirmed the boundaries of what was found on that cold, bleak day in January. And their wildlife report was not certified by the DNR. The calculation that was used to get to the 3.3 acres, it's not a cluster development. They clearly they built out to the maximum space in a conventional sense. The western banks of the drain are wetland and inaccessible. Building south on the southern peninsula is prohibited from the 1989 settlement and certainly should not be counted. And while we're at it, why is the 150-foot buffer zone being included? The removal of any of those sites would result in a density over 3.5 units per acre and back within the jurisdiction of the moratorium. If you look at the landscaping plan, they plan to generously plant 135 trees over 35 acres that they plan to disturb. I'm pretty sure that I have that many trees on my 1 acre lot. They also didn't provide a map of the existing trees because according to them, everything is junk. Our neighborhood is not currently covered by Walker Fire Department 2 weekends a month, and it would be irresponsible for the city to approve such a plan without first guaranteeing full-time coverage of the current taxpayers with the highest taxes in the city before adding 162 units more in our area. We all saw the smoke when the Greenridge apartments caught on fire, and to my knowledge, 5 additional fire departments were called in to help. And I believe that there's a lesson to learn from this unfortunate experience. This should be a park and not a development. God doesn't make more green earth, and that's where I stand. Thank you.
I'm going to be talking about the Eagle Wetlands map viewer, and I have copies for the
Can you state your name for the record, please?
I am Tom Altmeyer, 400 Dakota Drive, and my topic is going to be the wetlands. The original wetlands survey was conducted on January 11th and January 13th of 2023 by Peterson and Vandenberg Environmental, and they were retained by Scott Weirda for the developer. This was in advance of the February 1st, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. No wetlands review happened between the June 1st, 2022 Planning Commission meeting and the two dates of January 11th and January 13th in 23. The Planning Commission specified that the survey should be conducted during the growing seasons of April through June, and obviously January is not a growing season. But the directive was not followed. The wetlands delineation was to be conducted along with Eagle to assess whether any wetlands would be impacted by the proposed development. In a January 25, 2023 memo, Brandon Simon of Progressive AE states that the survey was conducted consistent with the procedures and best practices established by Eagle and with a review of the Eagle wetland map viewer, which I've now provided a copy to the Planning Commission. The copy that I have marked up shows a wetland that extends off the homes on Springbrook Drive. This runs from approximately 200 feet to the east of North Center Drive, and it runs down to the southeast into the residential area off of Springbrook. The wetlands area that is marked there was omitted in the survey provided to the Planning Commission in connection with it. So they totally omitted one wetland area. That wetland area is going to affect the retention pond on the south end, plus buildings on the south end. They plan on just ignoring that wetlands, and that's in the historical record. The homeowner, which the property abuts to this wetlands area, has given me permission to conduct any tours, so anybody from the city or the Planning Commission or the developer or their staff, if they want to see this omitted wetlands area, I'd be happy to conduct a tour. I have some pictures of this area.
Time.
This needs to be tabled because of the omitted wetlands area. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Ron Perleski. I reside at 1584 Catalina Drive, South Springbrook. Come before you here today to discuss about the proposed apartment complex. I have here with me some maps I'd like to share from a peer-reviewed and published project that aims to get flooding, fire, heat, and wind risk data that uses more reliable and modern techniques than what is currently available for referral. I'm going to discuss flooding risk associated with our neighborhood and development property in question. This first map is a general overview of our neighborhood and the development property. The blue shading are the area of flood risks. As you can see, we have a high-risk site as defined by the First Street Foundation. The First Street Foundation map shows areas subject to flooding using rainfall as a determining factor. The FEMA flood mapping in its current iteration, does not take into account rainfall, only coastal and river flooding. The next iteration, due in 2027, will be taken into rainwater into an account. If you were to compare this map to the proposed development design, you see that the complex plans to build right over some of the severe flooding areas. Building up these areas just means that the water will be displaced into the drains both north and south. As we know, the north drain is already extremely eroded as it is. A March 2023 report titled Climate Change Preparedness of the Great Lakes Communities, Regulatory Permits and Community Planning are based on outdated precipitation data. That's the title. This report focuses on changing rainfall across the Great Lakes region. This report cites NOAA data showing the frequency of heavy precipitation events defined as top 1% of 100-year floods has increased about 37% in the Great Lakes region since early 20th century. The map I outlined is based on rainfall as its present day, and as you can see, it is detrimental to the South Springbrook property as it is. As it was once spring-fed, but is now overloaded from the Greenridge apartments drains, as well as it's been addressed. My second map shows a south drainage pond from the AE firm and zoomed in flood risk map for South Springbrook. The new map, as they show, moves the retention pond, but it still feeds this drain. Here we have one house within 20 feet, one house within 22 feet of that stream, and we have 4 houses anywhere from 45 to 59 feet from that stream. How do these two relate? The proposed site plan shows a south drainage pond discharging into the stream. This is in addition to the drain pond at the Greenridge Apartments on the other side of North Center Drive. All this flowing into an already flowing spring-fed stream. During the neighborhood meeting hosted by Progressive AE on the 28th, a representative asked about south pond discharge, and that further consideration was made to downstream impact causing any additional water being released. The representative stated that it was not a county drain but a city drain, and it would be up to the city of Walker to manage it. And no study was done after the release point of water, which is done on their property. To us as residents, we see this as a fault on design and project implementation. The QR code on the backside of the document I hand out links to a video taken June 29th of this year during a 0.21 fall inch of precipitation dropping, so not even half an inch, not even a quarter of an inch. Yeah, you can see how it's overflowing that amount of water. As current residents in this condition, we feel that the city needs to take into account existing resident safety and risks at home having damage from this, any additional rainfall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mike Vanderklok. I live at 410 Dakota Drive, and my property abuts the Alpine Walker Drain. So I'll try not to replicate the information that's been given, and I'll walk off the cuff because we've got a heck of a lot of information that was provided tonight. In my career, I have to make decisions that significantly impact landowners, businesses, communities, and regions for decades and generations. And that includes restrictions on businesses, practices, and land use. So I understand completely the concepts and the processes. And the developer's done a great job of trying to drive you down the road of it's all about zoning. Well, clearly it's not, because we have all kinds of ordinance in here that talk about what this particular committee has authority for, and what they are to look at, and what they are to consider in the PASP process, regardless of what the zoning is. The zoning is the first step. If the zoning isn't there, they can't even bring an application. So that's the first step, not the last step. Then it's turned over to this committee. And they've used lots of interesting concepts of preserved and untouched for a 10-acre parcel that literally you have to denude. You have to bring in heavy equipment to grade it, pour concrete, bring in gravel, dig holes, and then say that that's natural and protected. There's nothing natural anymore in that area. And replanting trees, there's nothing natural about that. They need water, they need fertilizer, they need pesticides, and they need insecticides. And if you quit giving them that, they die. So I think the natural vegetation there is now would probably be a little offended by it being considered as scrub. The natural vegetation that has gone in the plants and screens. So I do think that they've done a great job putting up confusion. But this particular planning commission's role is to look at what's not in the zoning order and the flexibility, and there's been given tremendous flexibility and responsibility to go ahead and have clear authority to impose conditions, restrictions, or prohibitions on use, regardless of what the zoning says. That's specifically in the ordinances. And your job is to look out for those other things. Look out for what's the good of the city, what's the good of the people in the adjoining neighborhoods, what's the best use of that property. You have given specific authority to do that, and the place to do that is in the PASP process. And so I really appreciate all the time and effort that the Planning Commission and the staff has given to this issue, and I understand the stress that comes with having to make those decisions, because I have to make them myself. Concrete lasts for over 200 years. Asphalt well over 100. So a wrong decision will have irreversible impacts. So I want to thank you for your commitment and the cautious, balanced, and thoughtful manner and approach you've taken, and encourage you to continue that way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Annie Hamill. I live at 355 Glen Oak Drive Northwest. This was actually written by the mother in the back who was wrangling some kids, but she had to go put them to bed, so I'm going to read her in her place. Tonight, I wanted to share some of my concerns regarding the lack of a fence around the retention pond in the proposed plan. As some of you may have seen in the news, in March of this year, a 3-year-old boy went missing in an apartment complex in Gaines Township, just south of town. He, as a normal 3-year-old boy, being curious, adventurous, and fully capable of opening a door, wandered out of the apartment. When his parents realized he was gone, they called 911. A woman reported she'd seen the boy off alone by the pond, but didn't think to do anything about it. And 2 hours later, this boy's body was found at the bottom of the retention pond. That little boy, just like the one causing havoc in the back earlier, drowned because there was not a fence around this pond. When my husband and I moved in during lockdown 2020, there were around 5 children in the neighborhood. Since that time, the dynamic of our neighborhood has changed. We have a baby girl, more and more families with young children have moved in, and now we have close to 20 kids, elementary age and younger. Now let's add, say, 50 to 100 more children who would live in this complex, and the odds that one strays a little too close to the pond increases more. At the neighborhood meeting last week, my husband was assured by Mr. Simon that the pond would be dry most of the time, but most of that time means that sometimes it's full of water, especially in our neighborhood. And with the ankle-deep water that's present out back 3 months of the year, I'd bet it's full a whole lot more than just sometimes. You see, the developer doesn't want to show a fence on their plan because of a technicality. The technicality I'm speaking of is that the developer is not allowed to put any structures within that 150-foot buffer zone. A fence is a structure, including a fence would require moving the entire development around to accommodate the buffer zone requirements. We need a fence around that retention pond. We want to see a fence before a PASP is approved. The developer's past and present plans are a choice to put children's lives at risk. I don't care how much a fence would make them adjust the plan. I care about the safety and well-being of Gavin, of Kennedy, and all the other children and families who live there. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Cheryl Grakovich. I live at 418 Dakota Drive Northwest, and I'm reading this on behalf of Linda Altmeyer, who lives at 400 Dakota, because she could not be here tonight. On February 1st, Linda shared with you some history regarding the sale of the Greenridge Country Club property in 1989, and subsequently the City Commission granting CPUD zoning for Alpine Avenue commercial development and RPU D2 zoning for the remainder of the property, including, despite our strong opposition, all of the land that abuts our neighborhood. Our neighbors knew then that the RPUD2 high-density residential zoning was a very wrong fit for our neighborhood. 35 years later, we still know it's a wrong fit. Our neighborhood residences are not rentals or starter homes. They are well-tended, well-loved homes on large lots in a stunning, beautiful environment where we chose to live, to raise our families and enjoy our later years. Ward 1 already has the least amount of green space and the largest number of high-density dwellings in any of the city's wards. And that was news to me. I did not know that. Our neighborhood and the green space surrounding it meet that objective for natural preserves as set forth in the master plan. We ask that the Planning Commission suspend action on this latest PASP revision pending completion of study the Commission is undertaking on how land use can meet master plan objectives and how it can best serve the citizens of Walker. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tina Dykstra, and I live on 365 Dakota Drive. As I sat here today and I was listening, and one of the things that just struck me was the fact about the traffic on Alpine. I mean, if you think about it, 162 units going in, 2 adults living there, that's an additional 400 to 500 cars on Alpine Avenue. I mean, right now I sit through a traffic light just trying to get to the grocery store at least 4 times through the light, half the time on between 3 Mile and 4 Mile. So I just wanted to take that into consideration. 400 to 500 more cars on Alpine. It doesn't even seem feasible. And when I hear about the percentage of what it would only increase, I have to ask them, do they live on Alpine? Do they drive it every day?
Bray Lanning from 547 Kingsbury Street Northwest. I want to begin by thanking the City of Walker for giving our neighborhood a preview of what life will be like if this project goes forward. For 12 months, the lift station at the end of our street has been rebuilt. I live next door. We have been treated to an endless succession of earth-moving equipment, trucks hauling sand, gravel, topsoil, and tar, and then our houses have been bombarded by pile drivers and sand pounders day and night. It's just been a mess. I just realized working out of my garage today that everything in my garage is covered with a nice layer of Walker dirt. So thank you. I want to say to my neighbors on the other side of the creek, if you think it's going to be bad if this project goes forward, you have no idea what they have planned for you. 2 questions have not been answered. Number 1, why are you building residential housing in one of the most densely populated, developed parts of our city? Number 2, is this really the best thing to do with this land site? And I will just close by saying to our learned legal colleague that I would like to assist someone who has the technical skills in producing a montage film of the crashes at North Center and Alpine Drive that occur on an almost weekly and sometimes daily basis. So we could get a whole year's worth of these crashes, and then the men could use it as a promotional video to sell people on these new houses that they want to build.
Rob Locke, 3291 Springbrook. Gentlemen, I thank you for your considered patience with this. I just wanted to bring to mind regarding traffic. Ms. Schultz is a commissioner for MDOT, feather in the cap for Progressive, but I think that's a conflict. I just want to make sure you're looking really hard at those traffic stats. Thank you.
Steve Gurkovich, 418 Dakota Drive. My concern is that north, as they called it, a retention area, not a pond. As I spoke to the gentleman over here with the plaid shirt on at the meeting last week, he assured me that that wouldn't have water in it at any time except for when it rains. And I stated, well, how are you going to drain that? Well, we're going to take a 3-inch pipe and drain it into the Alpine Walker drain behind my house. And what happens when that gets plugged and it overflows? Well, it'll just overflow into the creek. No big deal. I went, wait a minute, that's not right. You can't do that. What's your contingency plan on if that overflows? I don't think they have one. Thank you very much.
Hi, excuse me. My name's Don Bigger. I live at 276 Timber Creek Circle in Timber Creek condos. And to follow up what Steve just said, we have that creek go through our condo complex. It curves, it turns. We have banks as high as the ceiling. We've spent thousands of dollars out of association money, along with some of the community money, to shore it up in the past. It doesn't work. When they were pumping the water at the pump stations, we didn't know at the time, but all of a sudden the creek is flowing like crazy. It's not raining. So we followed, and there was the work being done on the water system. It is already flooding us. I think this is gonna cause our association a lot of grief and a lot of money. I hope that's looked at. I hope the developers looked at our complex and how it would affect our units. Thank you.
Hi, Trevor Granger, 3532 Bayberry, so probably about as far as I could get from where this development is going to be, but still right up in the Greenridge area. And I wanted to just say, like, I'm so proud of the showing that's here tonight. I'm so thankful for all of these people coming out and trying to fight against this. The reason I say that is because I'm a 19-year military member still continuing to serve, and my family has been through a lot and has worked really hard to get where we are today. We were blessed to be able to buy 3.8 acres in the Greenridge area and build a new house that we ensured was back off the road, not going to be an eyesore, buried in some trees, and well secluded from the neighborhood so that it fit well with what was already there. A private, quiet community of just absolutely awesome people. I'm also a prior police officer. And I definitely have safety concerns when we're talking about putting in 160-something units that are rental. There are plenty of studies that show that high-density rental areas such as this are going to provide, generally more crime. And I don't have anything to back that up tonight. Again, I did not come prepared to speak this, but there are many studies that show it. And as a prior police officer, I personally experienced it. I worked in those areas a lot, and I dealt with a lot of crime in those areas. The last thing that I want to say is again, to the retention pond conversation. I have provided CPR for children, and there is absolutely no way that I'm not gonna let a fence be built around those things. Absolutely not. They have to be fenced off. If a single child's life is lost in there, this whole thing is unreal. Unreal. Thank you, sorry.
Good evening. My name is Jim Sturkin. I live at 3460 Bayberry Drive, Northwest. Thank you very much, members of the commission, Mayor Carey. Are you Terry Schweitzer or Mayor Carey? I'm sorry.
Terry Schweitzer, I'm not the
All
mayor.
right, there's a sign that says Mayor Carey there too. I wanted to start by quoting Mayor Carey. There was an article published today in Crane's Grand Rapids. And the mayor said, there are projects that are affected by this moratorium that are very transformative projects. Once you start them, you cannot undo them, he said. So we have to get it right. He said, project is like squeezing toothpaste out of the tube. Once you start, which is what they're asking you to do tonight, is start. You can't put it back in the tube. I know you are doing the right thing. There have been several meetings about this, and the commission is doing their very best in a tough situation to do this right. The revisions that the developer made to their plan are laudable. They are big steps in the right direction. The plan that they proposed tonight may very well be an acceptable plan, but we don't have to decide it tonight. We don't have to approve this PASP tonight. As a matter of fact, in part of your doing the right thing, you passed a moratorium on considering this. Now, they revised their plan so it would get under the density limit. Bottom line, they want to get as many houses in there as they can and do as little as possible to do it. That's a business. I'm a capitalist. I understand that. However, this moratorium, their plan is they don't have separate plans. They've made revisions. The moratorium applies to the original plan. You just can't revise the plan and say now the moratorium doesn't apply. It absolutely applies. If you look further at the moratorium, it says administrative action. It's been made very easy for you tonight to approve this plan. Over an hour and a half, being able to convince you of this, and we get 3 minutes. The city attorney and Ms. Preby have made a very convenient sheet for you to approve this. All you gotta do is circle. They got it all printed out for you. The skids are greased, gentlemen, but they don't have to be. They said they need a decision. They don't need a decision, they want a decision, and that's understandable. Part of the moratorium includes an appeals provision. If they don't believe that the moratorium applies to their revisions to their plan, they can appeal. That's in the moratorium. You've been doing it right. Please keep doing it right. You don't need to vote on this tonight. Enforce the moratorium and take your time and get it right, please.
I'm Christine Longcar. I live at 377 Dakota. And I'm a little confused about the wildlife requirements that were placed on this project. When Paula went over it, it was very highly summarized, and then the woman from Progressive just skipped over it. So can someone help me out with that?
After we take all the public comment, we may be able to talk with the developer or staff to be able to respond if there's a question of that nature. So we'll make note of that.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mark Jasinski. I live at 3234 Springbrook Drive. And I just wanted to snowball off of what my neighbor Ron presented to you guys. If you scan that QR code, you'll see a video of my backyard, which is 20 feet from the south spring that runs through all of the Springbrook Drive. And I just think if we dump, acres of concrete uphill from me, that water's got to go somewhere. And you see what 0.21 inches does. I'm just wanted on the record that that's a city-owned drain. I just don't want my property to turn into what they're dealing with on the York Creek. Thank you.
Thank you, Planning Commission. My name is Bill Allen. I live at 345 Dakota Drive. The developer appears to be quite proud of the green space that they have added to their proposal. Yet I believe these green spaces that they've included do not meet the intention of the city's master plan. A major purpose of green spaces intent in the city's master plan is for public use. The green spaces in the developer's plan are not accessible due to wetlands, steep slopes, and a buffer zone that is, by its very nature, intrusive on the existing homes. And while much has been claimed to be addressed regarding the stormwater runoff, the contractors who installed this new lift station recently, during our dry summer months, discovered that there was such a high water table they had to run 2 pumps continuously during a dry season. Clearly, additional paving of any portion of this property would negatively affect the watershed, regardless of what our county drainage reports predict. Many of the existing homes also depend on private wells and septic systems, which could be negatively impacted by additional higher water levels. The mistake on this property happened nearly 35 years ago, when the planning board approved the development plans in the first place for the former Greenridge Country Club property. Apparently, they did not have the knowledge, understanding, or foresight to recognize the future problems it would have on the Alpine York Creek watershed, among others. Perhaps no one questioned it at that time. This board, however, cannot claim the same ignorance, for in hindsight, we are all aware of the issues that have developed around this watershed, and we have brought to your attention the potential problems should additional development proceed. Compromised septic systems, compromised wells, erosion threatening the foundations of existing structures, because these problems will occur. So what are you to do? Are you obligated to honor a commitment to a developer from 1989 that no longer exists, or to a land that has evolved from both its original and intended uses? No. Your duty and responsibilities as members of the Planning Commission and your moral obligation as citizens of the great city of Walker is to minimize the damage that was caused by the decision of 35 years ago. How can you do this? Preserve as much green space as possible. Deny this development application today and move to change the zoning because the land has changed so that this green space will be preserved for future generations. 35 years from now, the citizens of Walker are going to once again look back upon the decision of this planning commission regarding this property. Will they shake their heads in wonder, or will they applaud your decision and celebrate the green space that you have preserved? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Everybody's had their say then? Okay.
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Support.
We have a motion on the floor and support from Tyler and Pat to close the public hearing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you very much. At this point, we've got a lot to chew on as far as the project. We've heard a presentation from staff giving perspective on key considerations for the project. The developer has provided some perspective in terms of the design that they've presented, what we're charged to do this evening is to decide how to respond to their request for preliminary area site plan approval. And one of the things I think that was brought out early on is that this is the first of many steps in the process, that some of the issues that have been brought up deal with more technical, more nuts and bolts detail on the development of the property. And that's something that when you get down to that type of detail, that takes place as part of the final area site plan. So I guess bearing that in mind, that we've got a lot of good feedback and perspective from the neighbors and from city staff and from the applicant. But we have to kind of focus in on the preliminary area site plan review and what the issues may be that coming into play. At this point, do we have any thoughts on how to proceed with that task?
You're looking for discussion at this point?
Yes.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I think the residents raise a lot of important concerns, and I think that I think you're right that a lot of those details, especially a lot of the drainage details, come really to fruition as a part of the final area site plan review, right? So a lot of the concerns that have been discussed will get caught at that level of the process if we end up moving to that level of the process. For me, and for my part, preliminary area site plan review, we're kind of looking at the two-dimensional level of this project and saying, fundamentally, is what's proposed compliant with what we're doing as a city, what our objectives are as a city. And for my part, I think that where I fall off, and I think that we're in total misalignment with what's proposed, is in the letter and intent of the master plan, right? And to me, that I think we're kind of irreconcilable with what's proposed to what we are seeking in that document. Frankly, my perspective as an individual and one voting member here is that the 330 and 350 Greenridge properties pretty clearly fall to the east of what we identify as preserved open space. If you wanted to put single family homes on those properties at the density that you find in the neighborhood to the east, that's what I think acceptable development looks like on that space. Once you get into the west side of the property, we have that delineated as preserved open space. I think we leave some allowance in the way that we wrote it to say that if you want to use that western edge of that property along what is Center Drive to put some higher density residential on that road, that could be considered compliant with what we're writing in here, right? With that like against like determination that we've outlined. But I don't think that utilizing all of that center core of that property that then abuts to the neighborhood for a high density residential development is really the intent of what we wrote in here. So to me, I don't see the alignment between what we lay out in the master plan and all of the work that we put into that. And I think that that's a big part of why we put the moratorium in place in the first place, right? That's why we did that, is so that we could better effectuate the intent of the policy that we have in the master plan, right? For projects like this, major projects on these, especially on these substantive undeveloped lots, so that we can provide clear guidance not only to our city staff, but to the developers to say, this is really what the master plan is meant to say. Because we keep running into these situations on these major developments about, well, we read it to say this and we read it to say that, right? Staff has one interpretation, developers have another, and we on this planning commission have our own. So at some point, we are tasked to provide clear guidance in that document, and that is why we put the moratorium in place. That is why developments like this initially were caught in that, to be able to give us the opportunity to revisit that language and make sure we're being clear as a city, to make sure that we get to the point that we can get the developments that we are looking to put in place in these really important key locations. So again, to me, I do not think that what's proposed here is an approvable project from my interpretation, but that's where I sit.
Pat?
Yeah. A lot of things going on here. I know, the water is the big issue, is one of the big issues, let's put it that way. And we have experts that are telling us one thing, and we have neighbors telling us another. I have to rely on the experts saying that they're gonna take care of this the best they can. I mean, the worst case, you leave it the way it is, and you got the flooding every year, all the time. You don't want that. You want something to start taking care of it. So I kind of lean towards, the development actually helping. Well, everybody's an expert here, I guess, and so I guess if you guys are the experts. We live there. That doesn't make you an expert. That does not make you an expert. Anyways. I have tons of water coming through my backyard too from Lincoln Country Club. And, I'm not an expert in it. But the city is, and the city does what they can.
Okay.
All right, let's not get into arguments here. Let me finish, okay? I'm kind of on your side, so stick with me here, okay? The moratorium is something that we had set up, and I think this kind of should fall under that, even though I know they're trying to get under that. I think we should sit back and wait. I'm kind of with Steve. So, as far as the developer goes, I think they've done a lot since the first few plans that have come out. They've kind of listened to your guys' needs and desires. I mean, they put cul-de-sacs in. You want traffic to be not so heavy on Alpine? Let's send them right through your neighborhoods. They didn't do that, okay? So we're trying to keep it out of your neighborhood and out on Alpine, which we all know is a crazy mess, especially this time of year. So I think they're trying, and I think this is one of the better plans that I've seen. Just a real quick comment on the detention ponds and a fence. Nobody wants another fence. I remember the story about the child that fell in there, and the first thing I thought of was not about the detention pond. I thought about the parents not parenting their child. I'm a father of many kids. I'm a grandfather.
All right.
Anyways, that was my comment. You had your comment, I have my comment, okay?
Point of order here, please. This is a case where we're deliberating. It's not a matter of getting into a back and forth on it. He is entitled to, and we expect him to provide his perspective on it.
I'm done.
I, first of all, want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and expressing your opinions and feelings about it. I'm going to just be real quick with my comments and echo Pat and Steve, and I think we need to just kind of hold tight, hold to the moratorium, be more deliberative about it. The plan as presented tonight is an improvement based on the first few plans. They've made efforts by listening to everybody, but I do think we just need to kind of slow down and kind of hold to the moratorium at this time.
Yeah.
I think the developer's done a good job. It has responded to many of the complaints. I think a lot of these issues would be further taken care of in a final area site plan. But we do have a review of the master plan going on, and it may be best just to delay. But I guess generally I would be in favor of going forward. But other than the moratorium that's going
on. By right, they have the right to build this. Just by right, legally. By right, you as a citizen can petition the city to change the zoning on that. You saw it happen in Alpine, correct? Yes. So why are you here? Why aren't you doing that? We can't sit here as a body and change the zoning. That's not our job. That's your job. If you don't like it, change it. If you don't like it, buy it. We tried to buy it. Not my problem. It's enough money could have bought it. No. Now, hey. Really? I agree with, now this is a love-hate thing. I agree with Steve. It doesn't fit the master plan. We should delay it. This fell under the moratorium previously. Just because you shrunk it, oh, now it's past it? It's still a large development. It's still a problem. It is not the intent of what we took a long time in the master plan to debate. And you guys waited a very long time to develop it. So why should we hurry now? So I'm of the opinion that we, I have a couple other things. I'm of the opinion that we apply the moratorium to this, and if they want to argue it, fine. As far as the retention ponds in the 150-foot zone, I don't agree with it as it's a no disturb zone or whatever. I don't know about the fences around the retention ponds, so I don't have a lot to say about that. Somebody said the city is building this and the city is building that and the city is doing this. We're not building anything. The developers are building it. It's private property. So, we have a job to do. But right now, I think we need to do our job and slow walk this because we don't get a second chance at it.
Well, taking into account the commentary that has been provided to us from the neighbors, the information has been provided by staff. and the applicant's reasoning, they feel that it's in support of it. I feel that the preliminary area site plan, I don't see anything in particular that would warrant deferring action on the project this evening. Again, it is zoned, given the current zoning of the property, provides permitted and special land uses associated with the property. They're proposing a use that is permitted under their existing zoning, and I feel that the development plan that they put together at this point is responsive to the regulations and the policies of the city. There are other parts of it, more the detail that would come through a final area site plan, and I think that there's a time for that to address a lot of the detail that's been raised here this evening, one of which is making a distinction between a retention pond and a detention pond in terms of how that functions on a particular site. But that, again, my position is that I feel that it would be reasonable to take action on it, to approve the preliminary area site plan as they've submitted it. Now, the clinker here, though, is the timing of the most recent plan. I think in good faith, the applicant was wishing to be responsive to the issues that have been raised, the concerns that have been raised, and I feel that has been responsive to that. But the timing on it, and in terms of the deliberations here, we were all gauged for the most part on the plan that was initially submitted November 20. What I don't know, though, is if you mathematically, if you put those 24 units back into it, what that density is, the gross density is on this site. Paula, do you know offhand what that might be?
It's a lot of pressure after a 14-hour day.
Yeah.
$3.94.
Okay, and the threshold is 3.5. So in that respect, while I feel that it's a good project at moving forward, that perhaps the moratorium that's in place right now, the parameters that have been set forth by ordinance in order to establish the moratorium comes into play in terms of being able to take an action on that this evening. Now again, okay. Please. Okay. Okay, just let me, I'm just sharing a thought, and mine is my perspective on it. We take the collective decision of the Planning Commission as to what action we do take this evening. But I think that that's a factor in terms of perhaps deferring it to get that clarification on the master plan policies that was identified in the declaration of the moratorium that's at hand right now. So you've got the perspective of each of us individually. I'll entertain a motion as to where we go from here.
All right, I'm gonna give it a try, and Jeff, you can yell at me if I get off base here. But,
Can I, before you start, I guess as a matter of, I would encourage the planning commission if this is the direction you're inclined to go. I've heard several members of the planning commissions make reference to, I think we have to rely on the moratorium. The difficulty with that is, at least from my perception, earlier in the meeting, the planning commission on a 4-2 vote basically said, this is a cluster development, therefore we're willing to accept the density being identified by staff, and that's under the moratorium. So I would encourage you, in whatever you do, not to rely on the moratorium as a basis for your decision. I don't see how the moratorium, given your earlier, unless you feel that was in error and it needs to be reconsidered, but I don't see how the moratorium alone certainly can form a basis for your decision.
so Jeff, here is my thinking and where I am inclined to justify my reasoning. My feeling in tabling it is that I don't feel that the proposed development conforms to the city's master plan, but the city is performing an ongoing review of our master plan to provide clear guidance on the key sites within the city for purposes of development. So the tabling would be contingent upon the impact that that process has on the site.
So, devil's advocate, if the motion were to be to table, in fairness to everyone in the room, the public and the developer and the planning commission, I would encourage you to set some type of very hard date as to when a decision would be made relative to master plan compliance or not, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, and I would say that we've talked about a substantial completion date of April 2024. I believe we have a tentative meeting date set within that range.
The timeline we've been working on is regarding completing the substantive review of the master plan within the timeframe of the moratorium, which is set to expire on May 5th of 2024. But that is the timeline we have set to do the review of the master plan that Stephen is mentioning.
Right, but devil's advocate,
please.
I think the moratorium, but the question I think before the planning commission tonight is, does this plan meet the master plan? And I think you can certainly take the position, I can't tell you yet. I want input from my consultant, but I don't candidly see why that would take until April to get that input relative. Now, if you're talking about a future master plan, that's a different issue, but I think that's something we need to talk about probably privately.
And that's what I would like to address, if that's truly what's going on.
Well, I don't know that it is though, Pat.
I'm all for opening public comment.
My inclination is that as I view the plan today, I don't perceive it to comply with the master plan.
Okay.
And pending the changes and the greater clarification we will provide within that master plan review process, that is where we would be tabling to the end of that process.
Or do we deny it because it doesn't match the master plan? Flat out deny it.
In some respects, that seems like, I mean, you can certainly ask the developer what they want. I suspect what they'll tell you is we'd like approval, but short of approval, if we're gonna get a decision, we want a decision. If you want to deny us and state the basis for the denial. Is that fair?
Fair enough.
So, if you're going to deny, then I'm going to encourage you, and the developer's not going to be pleased with this, I'm going to recommend that you do so tentatively, contingent on staff and our office preparing findings based on the record, that would be voted upon by the planning commission at your next meeting.
We would object on the record to that process.
And that's fine. If that makes sense. In other words, the vote would be, we're voting to tentatively deny to become final, if you will, when we approve findings, whatever they are, Doesn't mean whatever we prepare is what you're gonna adopt. It just means that you will, at your next meeting, then adopt findings. And then we're done. If that's the direction the planning commission wants to go.
If I could offer this, Steve, if you're contemplating that. I think that the preliminary area site plan that they've submitted, in many respects, is consistent, not only with existing zoning, but with the requirements of our zoning ordinance. And I feel it's in large part consistent with our master plan now. So in that respect, I think it would be better to table action to a date certain as suggested by the city attorney, as opposed to denying the project. I think that that would ignore, I think, the merits of what they've submitted thus far in the process.
I have issues with the timeline on the next meeting, because, I mean, we're in December here, and you know how that goes. I would say a month, or the second meeting in January, or something to that effect, to give it some time. I mean, it's a tough time of year. Sorry, it just is.
May I ask a question? With respect to amendments that are in process.
Could you come up to the microphone, please?
Thank you, sir. As mentioned, it's been over 2 years, or approaching 2 years. Our client's entitled to a decision. We've been tabled, we've changed the plan over and over and over. We asked for a decision. If you refuse to give us a decision, which we've objected to, and we don't know what grounds you would have to refuse that, then we would ask that at least, because obviously you're considering changes to the zoning ordinance right now and to the master plan. It is absolutely our expectation that the existing terms of the zoning ordinance and the existing terms of the master plan will apply to any decision made with respect to our application, because our application was filed long before even any idea of potential changes to these ordinances or master plan provisions were ever being considered. So it's important to us and critical to us that the rules not be changed on us almost 2 years after we've been through this process. And particularly after we've gone through such an extensive level of changes to accommodate not only city comments, but also the community. And particularly when the concerns about the project are primarily use-related, and this is a by right use, as has been pointed out. So those are our objections and concerns, which we are quite passionate about, and hope they're taken into consideration.
Okay, thank you. All right. You still, Steve?
May I?
No.
Well, I think the picture's about as clear as mud right now. So I'm a little skeptical on how to proceed, because I think we have a number of different ideas about what the picture looks like right now among the commission. I think that there's an inclination that some are unclear on whether or not we're master plan compliant. I am of the mind that we are not, and some are of the mind that we are compliant, and there are other conditions upon which tabling should occur. So I guess, Jeff, I'm to you for a little guidance here.
So, and I'm just offering an idea. If the inclination of the majority of the planning commission is to table, then as I said before, I'd give, out of respect, I'd give a very hard date to everyone in terms of when, whatever you're waiting to review as part of the reason for the tabling, you need, whether it's our consultant, our planning consultant, staff, whomever, you need to give them very firm dates by which they will have their report to you so you can assess it and make your determination. I start from that premise. I think if so something along the lines of if there was a motion to table pending receipt of a report from X by this date, at which time a determination shall be made by the planning commission relative to compliance with the master plan as it currently exists, along with anything else you want by that date certain. It's kind of a hybrid approach, but that's kind of what I'm hearing from the planning commission.
And that would be on a little bit different timeline than sending it out to the end of our formal process, you would expect, correct?
I would think so, because as I said before, I don't know how the city, and now I'm looking at it, we're in court, and I'm trying to explain to a judge how the planning commission said, well, it's not a cluster or it is a cluster development, it's not subject to the moratorium per staff, but we're gonna say we still need everything the moratorium would have otherwise provided. I just think candidly that's a bad look. And I don't think that's really what the planning commission, if I'm hearing you correctly, is trying to accomplish. I think what you're trying to accomplish is you want some direction, regardless of what the final decision is going to be. You want some direction on the current master plan and how it applies to this particular plan, which was, as the chair already pointed out, only presented to some of you this evening for the first time.
Yeah.
Some of you really have not had an opportunity to, the staff has, but you haven't. So.
Paula, what do you think is a reasonable timeline?
I can provide you some meeting dates. Looking at January planning commission meetings that you could put this on the agenda are January 3rd and January 17, February 7 and February 21. I would say, in my opinion, January 17th is a reasonable amount of time. Given the holidays, the December 20th meeting is very full. And with the holidays, there's a lot of time not to work on projects, where it's difficult to work on projects.
January 17th was kind of the date that struck me as we're kind of talking through it in this way. Pulse of the commission on that? Do we feel kind of comfortable with that? And I think what we would look for on that 117 date is an analysis. Analysis regarding master plan compliance performed jointly by our master plan consultant and community development department.
City attorney?
And city attorney.
Leave me out of it.
In
So
addition,
are you in or out on that?
That was a joke.
Oh. Well, I just want to make sure.
Whatever you decide is fine.
well, joke or not, you're in.
Yeah.
Updated plan documents available to planning commission. Okay, all right. I think we're where we're gonna get at this point. So for our purposes, I will make a motion to table the case 23-028. Is that what we've got here?
Yes.
Yes. Pending an analysis regarding master plan compliance for the project performed jointly by our master plan consultant, community development department, and city attorney. Updated plan documents available to the planning commission, and the tabling is to a date certain, January 17th, 2024.
My only question would be, is there anything else the planning commission collectively will want to see by that, as part of the agenda packet for that meeting?
Well, the question is, what of the asks that we have remaining are concerns that apply directly to a preliminary area site plan review?
Exactly.
I think the water, but I don't know if they can get the water done by then. Any study on the water done by January 17th.
Yeah, I mean, typically, the water, Scott, for your part, would just be a general sense. You would be looking for a general sense that we're in the direction of being accurate to what we've stated thus far, correct?
I would have a hard time giving you any additional information for these findings, other than what we've already provided.
Okay. Is that your motion?
Trying to just quickly think if there's any other pieces of this. The cul-de-sacs, do we want to ask for anything there? Because I mean, 48's a lot of units on one side of it, but again, I guess that's just a part of a typical review. So, yeah, I guess that's my motion then.
Support.
Okay, motion by Steve, supported by Tyler, to table action to January 17, 2024, to allow for consideration of joint staff and consultant to analyze the master plan wording that we have in place and advise on how to proceed from here.
And that's based on the updated, what I'll call the updated plan, the plan that, the 12-4 iteration of the plan.
Correct.
Right.
All right. Everybody understand the motion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Wow. Thank you for your attendance this evening. Oh, would you be able, Paula will be available to answer that.
Holy crap. So nobody's happy, right? As long as nobody's happy, I'm happy.
We're still meeting. We're still meeting.
Yes. Yeah, we just haven't.
Yeah.
Terry.
Oh, you're saying the public hearing?
We're still meeting.
We'll reopen opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just tabled it again, so.
Yep.
Again.
So,
Here we are. Huh?
Yes.
We did, but we'll allow opportunity.
The 12:20 meeting of the Planning Commission. I apologize for this, but we have 4 items on the agenda the week before Christmas.
December 20?
December 20.
I'm around. Are you?
So we have the
Excuse me? We're trying to close out the meeting, so if you could take the conversation outside, please. Thank you.
Yeah, you need to get one down.
For the 12:20 meeting of the Planning Commission, we have 4 items on the agenda. The first is the public hearing regarding the zoning ordinance update. That was originally scheduled for tonight, and it got moved, and I think that is in everybody's best interest.
Yep.
Second, we have 2 tentative preliminary plat reviews. One for the north single-family section of the Waterford Village PUD, and a new one for 18 lots between Pheasant and Whitmore.
Okay.
And then the fourth is a site plan review for a commercial fueling depot in the industrial area just south of Northridge Drive.
Okay.
So those are the 4 projects that are coming. One new project came in today for the January 3rd meeting, and that is a PASP amendment that I haven't had a chance to look at yet, but we'll tell you more about at the next meeting.
Okay. It's the January 17th meeting. This should probably be the first thing on the schedule.
Yes,
Yep.
I will limit that meeting as well. It will not.
Can it be the only thing on the schedule, please?
We had the nice short park thing, and then we. All right, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for your
Hey,
time.
Paula,
and
so on the Waterford one, we all got postcards and it says, so you said it's just a north section? Because it said 52 lots when there's really supposed to be 70 or 69 lots on that. So this is only part of that, correct?
it's just the northern section. It is So we did the condo section,
So is
the
this the
middle
whole-
19 lots came, this is the last piece of residential component of Waterford.
Because the original plan showed 69 single-family homes.
That was total, the condo section and the north section, they got separated out.
No, I looked at it again tonight before I came here. It says 69 single-family homes, and the postcard says 52 single-family homes, which is fine if they're gonna make the lots bigger. That's fine too, I was just curious, so.
It's 52 in this one, and there were not 19 in the other one.
Yeah,
for a
those are
total
the
of
condos.
73 or
Yeah,
something.
anyways, it's,
Okay.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carried.
You're welcome.